All right, Aaron, welcome.
All right, welcome everybody once again. This is our little show, Conspiracy or Not. Here we come. I'm Aaron. I've got my pal Ian with me, and we are missing Amy right now at the moment. And we're very sorry to say she's having a very terrible headache. And look who we have with us. I'm very excited. We have our very special guest, Charles Kos, with us. Tonight we're going to be talking about ancient cultures, ancient civilizations. Charles has a really unique and individual approach to these ideas and concepts. I'm really excited to be speaking with him. And at the moment, he is muted, and I'm trying to get him unmuted. We were having some audio issues with our intro. As most of you know, we are anything but professional around here. Finally got him unmuted. Welcome, Charles Kos.
Thank you very much, Aaron. I'm really happy to be here, and hello, Ian, and it's a real pleasure.
Thanks for being here.
All right, Charles, I have to say this, and I know I've already said some of it off air before we went live, but I really feel like I have to say this. I'm going to mute my, I'm going to kill my camera because I want to read this here. I'm going to try to keep this short. Your channel is amazing. What you're doing over there is needed. It's desperately needed. We as a society need more people like you who are truly thinking outside the proverbial box, as it were. Your ideas are truly unique. After a long preview of your material, I recognize that your brain operates outside the standard set parameters, and I really love that. I could literally binge watch your channel for weeks at a time. This is not only one of my favorite subjects to be talking about, but you have a really interesting and unique approach, and I just can't wait to get into this with you tonight. So even though I don't always agree with some of your conclusions, and by the way, I do plan on challenging a little bit as we go this evening. I just really love the way you think, because I can tell that by your statements and by your use of language that you're not set in your own ways. You seem very open to any alternative idea as long as it matches the evidence and whatever makes the most logical sense. So with that, Charles, please do us a favor. Give us your own bio. Just tell us who you are, what you're about, how you got started in this sort of research, how old you are, what kind of history, background, education. Just bring us up to speed on who is Charles Kos.
Okay, Aaron, thanks very much for that. That was very flattering. About me, Charles Kos, I'm 35 years old, and I've been a student for much of my life. I did a chemistry degree at Melbourne Uni. I did an arts degree. I didn't want to be a chemist. I wanted to do the humanities, get the classical education, learn Latin. I did that. I went right through. I managed to get into honors. I had one professor who was trying to keep me down. She didn't like me too much, but I did all the history subjects that I could do. And I got around that. So I got in, and I got into honors, and I wanted to do as a research project the Templars. And yeah, I wanted to say that the Templars were devil worshippers. Basically, they were Gnostics, but my professor didn't like that idea, so I did Robin Hood instead. That turned into a PhD. I did a PhD in Robin Hood, and we found the original Robin Hood in the Chronicles, and that was very exciting. While I was doing this, I was also reading about ancient mysteries, and I was just so fascinated by them. And I got into YouTube about a year ago after writing a book about pyramids, because I was fascinated about pyramids and what they represented. and that's who I am.
And please forgive me, I was supposed to mention that you are an author. So what's the name of your book, and where can people get their hands on it?
The book is In Search of the Origin of Pyramids and the Lost Gods of Giza, and it's on Amazon, and it's about tribes in the Stone Age going into Egypt, bringing their gods.
So you did a PhD on Robin Hood. Is that what you just said?
Robin Hood. Would you like to hear about it?
Certainly. Why not?
Well,
so you hold a PhD?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely. And what we did was, I said to my professor, you know, I want to find the original Robin Hood. And he said, well, of course, you know, he's not going to be anyone of any national significance. He's just going to be some outlaw. And I was saying, yeah, okay, well, let's see. So I eventually found, I found a guy in the Chronicles of Matthew Paris. And I showed this to the professor, and this guy was in history in 1231. His name was Robert of Thwing. And he had a grievance with the church, and he decided to go around England with hoods, him and his men with hoods. They went around robbing the clergy, taking all the corn out of their barns, basically giving it to the poor or selling it very cheaply and then selling the coins to the poor. I showed this to my professor. It's all in Latin, never been translated. And he said, he's from Oxford. He's got this nice accent. He says, but this is incredible. This is the original Robin Hood. This is unbelievable. And later on that evening, I got an email from him, and he found out, he was reading into it, and he saw that this guy was called Robertum Palliatum, and he was saying, do you know, a pallium is a monk's hood. So his name is actually written as Robin Hood in the Latin. It's not written in English. And this is why no one's noticed it before. It's all Latin, you see.
Wow.
And yeah, and I found out that period of history is actually hardly studied at all. People study up to King John, 1215. And then there's a huge gap until you get to Edward Longshanks, the guy in Braveheart, that wicked king.
Right. Yep.
And that gap is not studied. It's filled by a king called Henry III, who was a slave of the Pope. So England was under papal control for much of the 13th century. And my professor specializes in the area, and he didn't even know this. And not many people know this. There aren't that many people studying certain parts of history. And that got me thinking that actually we don't know that much, and we can easily transform our understanding by doing a bit of research and putting two and two together.
So that's super interesting. So where does, you said Robin of Kingsley, where does this Robin of Locksley come in?
Robin of Locksley was, he's a bit tricky. He might have been another outlaw. He first appears in the 1600s in a manuscript purporting to be about the history of Robin Hood, but I can't find anything about him earlier than that. And yeah, the guy I'm talking about is 1231, but then there's a gap of 200 years after him before the first Robin Hood ballads in English appear. So that's what causes the mystery of who was Robin Hood. There's a dark ages in the Robin Hood history, and we just don't have the information available.
Absolutely fascinating. So what exactly is your PhD in?
Well, it's about basically about the historical Robin Hood. It's about this character called Robert of Thwing and his troubles in the 13th century. What happened was King John in 1213, he was like a psychopath. He was a raving lunatic. And to annoy his nobles and cement his permission, he handed England to the Pope. And the Pope said, well, this is very good. John, you can be my regent. You're in command of England now, and the nobles have to obey you. And I'm going to bring my friends over, and they're going to take over the lands belonging to your nobles. Only 2 years after this was Magna Carta, and this is really what triggered Magna Carta. People talk about Magna Carta. Yeah, exactly. People talk about Magna Carta as being the document of founding English Parliament, but it's actually more than that. It's actually resistance. The nobles are saying these are our rights. We want our rights back as they were by ancient tradition. And about 15 years after this, the historical, I think it was the historical Robin Hood, Robert of Thwing, this village in northern Yorkshire. He owned some lands around York. He was a victim of some of the Pope's friends trying to take over. And this was amazing. And my professor didn't even know this was happening. And he was telling me, do you know, it seems that England at the time was a land under occupation. and that's what you get from reading the Chronicles. And it's sort of unknown history. No one talks about this, and there are no biographies even of that king Henry III, because he was kind of boring and he was a slave of the Pope. So, but he ruled a long time, about 60 years.
Awesome. So, am I to understand that your PhD is specifically in Robin Hood? I mean, is that an actual PhD subject to hold a PhD in?
Absolutely, and people are surprised about this. When I was traveling around, and I tell people ask me in the hostels, "What do you do?" And I said, "Oh, I'm doing a PhD in Robin Hood," and they're like, "What? Really? You're doing a PhD in Robin Hood?" And I'm like, "Yeah, you can do a PhD in whatever you want." So yeah, it was a lot of fun. It took me about 7 years because it was knocked back. Some other professors didn't like it. Basically what happens is 3 other professors have to mark it. 1 of them liked it, 2 of them didn't like it. So I had to rewrite certain chapters slightly according to their own ideologies. Everyone has different perspectives in history, opinions, but eventually it got through.
Well, that's horrible and awesome at the same time.
It absolutely is. And yeah, I'm currently working on a paper. And so this paper will be about the historical Robin Hood, but it has been knocked back. So I'm still working on it, but it is frustrating getting back to it, because it's going to be knocked back again. There's going to have to be more corrections and so on and so on.
Fantastic. Okay, listen, let me see. Let me try to get my notes. I've got lots and lots of notes here, and I have to admit that they're not exactly organized, or several of them are out of place. Tonight we will be talking about pyramids. We're going to be talking about ancient structures, megaliths, construction methods, civilizations, and all that good stuff. We're going to be making notes of the similarities from culture to culture around the world, and even spanning segments of time. The similarities have between the elongated skulls, mummification, the polygonal earthquake-proof megalithic construction, hieroglyphic writing styles, precise astronomical alignments, by the way, spanning literally almost every ancient culture all the way around the world. What I would like to do to get us started here, I want to do a screen share, and I've got a video partially queued up. It's just going to take me just a second, and I want to play about 4 minutes of this particular video. It's a little bit mind-blowing, and like I was telling you before we went live here, it's a little bit of an older documentary. This was sent to me by my friend Dominic, who is in the live chat at the very moment. And let's see, I want to play from 1 hour. I think it's 1 hour and 29 minutes, I think. And as soon as I can get this thing accurately queued up, I want to play about 4 minutes of this.
Why? We have absolutely no idea.
All right.
This matter.
Just a moment here. I think it's 1 hour and 29 minutes I want to start at. $58.28, almost there. $59.24. It's probably not too bad. I'm going to go ahead and let this play for about 4.5 minutes, and then we'll come back and we'll discuss this. All right? And you guys let me know if the audio comes through. If there's any problems, I'll turn the volume up or down.
Maybe because they feel uncomfortable admitting that the pyramids were built with such precision in these primitive times. Ancient builders worked with a precision that modern architects would envy. Their achievements have never been better.
These are the tools that are necessary to determine the precision on the artifacts. These are modern tools. These tools do not exist in the archaeological record.
The builders of the pyramid were working with a precision that they didn't have the tools to check. It's just like the statue at Luxor, which has a perfect symmetry. Only modern methods can measure. How on earth did the ancient Egyptians do it? If we draw a circle with a diameter of 1, then this circle's circumference equals pi, or 3.1416. Divide this length by 6, and we get 0.5236, a number surprisingly close to the cubit's length. This could be how the pyramid builders chose their cubit. If you draw a square, you can imagine all sorts of different heights of pyramid on it. Now draw a circle with the same length as the square. Measure the radius of that circle. This is the height of the Great Pyramid. That's why the Great Pyramid contains both pi and the golden number. This length divided by the visible height, the visible surface divided by the invisible surface. This length divided by the visible height also equals the square visible surface divided by the invisible. This length divided by this one equals the golden number. That was enough. All this can't be chance, because everywhere you look in the pyramid, you come across pi and the golden number. It's found in the visible pyramid, and it's there in the upper chamber.
Okay, I'm glad I found and played that part, but to be quite honest, it's actually not the part that I actually thought I wanted. And I'm going to try to see if I can find exactly where that was. Please forgive me for not having it ready to go here. 103, 129. This might be it.
But it never occurs in Egyptian calculations. So this knowledge of the golden number is very surprising.
Many Egyptologists say the ancient Egyptians had no great mathematical skills, and all this number stuff is just coincidence. But here's a mathematician's opinion.
We meet it so often that the probability of it being due to chance is nil. It is infinitesimal to me. Frankly, it's like zero. It stands to reason, even for a mathematician, meaning someone who can assess probability, that the volume of that pyramid was picked because of its numerous possibilities to reveal through it the golden number.
I think that ancient Egyptians were aware of the golden number, but they couldn't have come across the resolution each time, especially the perfect one. They had to possess that knowledge. It's not in their culture to divulge it. They kept it secret, and the best way to keep a secret is not to convey it anywhere.
Okay, so while I'm trying to get this exactly where I wanted it, what do you think about that so far, about this idea that the ratio, the phi ratio, the 1 to 1.618 is all over the pyramid, and these so-called experts are saying things like that the Egyptians, they didn't have it written down anywhere, and it might have been a consequence of some of the other proportions that they were using.
Well, the Egyptians the archaeologists have to remain within their paradigm, and they have to, if they're doing anything, they want that to be published. So they are going to say the Egyptians didn't have the techniques, they didn't have the paper, they're Stone Age. And at the end of the day, that causes a huge contradiction. I think many of these ratios were generated on a sort of computer, and these were then added to the pyramid, added to the architectural plans, because there is just so much in there. Either you need a team of mathematicians, or you're going to need something amazing to have created that, to have generated all the ratios. And it's not just the Great Pyramid. The whole of the Giza Plateau seems to have been designed at the same time. And incorporating phi, of course, I think they wanted to do a bit of a homage to the gods, to heaven, to whatever it was, and they had to incorporate fire. They were obsessed with fire, and listen, they must have had huge libraries as well. That they must have, and the Great Pyramid was a consequence of a very high civilization.
Well, it sure as hell wasn't a bunch of guys pounding on rocks in the middle of the desert.
Now, Charles, I want to ask you, have you heard of Edward Leeds Scalnan before?
No.
He has a place called Coral Castle in Florida.
Oh, I've heard of it now. Yep.
And actually, Aaron has been there in person. And he's left clues within his Coral Castle on the secret of how he did it. And it's all mathematical. It's all within quadruplets and sequence of quadruplets. And he comes up with pi in there as well. I'd encourage you to watch that. I can send you the link. I'll give you the link if you like. It's very interesting.
Okay, that would be good. Yeah, that's very interesting. Maybe he had a bit of Egyptian in him.
And it's all to do with the Freemasons. He compares it with what's on the Freemason Lodge wall in Philadelphia, the Grand Lodge.
Yeah.
And they show how the beads of electricity move. They show how Ed's flywheel, it matches right up with Ed's flywheel, what's on that wall. So I can give you that link. It's very interesting.
Cheers, that would be appreciated. Yeah.
And when it comes to levitation and floating stones and things like that, that's pretty much the answers are right there. So.
No, it really is an interesting presentation or documentary.
Mind you, the music's not very good, but
yeah, shows how these secrets have been kept by the Freemasons and how the Freemasons incorporated in much of their artwork. The numbers, the ratios, it's pretty remarkable stuff.
Yep. I'll post it in the chat as well for you guys if you're interested in watching that. It's very interesting. You got to watch till the very end to see the whole thing get summed up.
God, I wish I could find this. There's a segment in this documentary here that shows that there's a straight line that's roughly 100 miles wide, and it goes all the way around the entire world. And within this 100-mile radius, I'm not sure if this is it right here, but literally every single one of the major sites, from the Giza Plateau to Angkor Wat, all the way around the world to Easter Island, Pumapunku, all the major sites going through Mesoamerica, every single one of them fall within this, what would be an alternate equator, essentially. Mohenjo-Daro is an antipode. If I can find it, it's pretty amazing because the chart that they show, for instance, Mohenjo-Daro is an antipode to Easter Island, and Angkor Wat is an antipode to the Nazca lines in Peru. It's just pretty astounding. It suggests that we used to have an equator that is different from the one that we have right now. Just wondered if you had any knowledge about that.
Well, that is very interesting. I think the equator was certainly different. There were no, as far as I know, there was no glaciation in Siberia in the last ice age. And mammoths did eat tropical vegetation in Siberia. And we have not recovered from that event. The Earth might have warmed up, but we haven't recovered in Russia in terms of what the climate used to be. And so certainly I think the equator was different. With regards to the antipodes and all of that stuff, I think that ancient monuments, and this is the thing, Graham Hancock has gone into this in huge detail, and he has talked about how all these ancient sites are linked together, but it's hard to see how, because they're all obviously a different culture. And what I would suggest is they're all built using blocks that were just found lying around from ruined cities of a previous culture which knew the whole earth. And everything, Stonehenge, pyramids, everything, they're built from ruins. The blocks were lying there, and they just built them up again into some ancient monument to primitive gods.
Yeah, it seems that every culture, every ancient megalithic site was built on top of an older one.
Absolutely.
Even as old as they are today, they're still built on top of something older.
Absolutely true. I mean, you even look at Stonehenge, and I was just absolutely shocked when I was reading a book about Stonehenge by Rodney Castleton, and he said that there were actually totem poles or something on the site in the old Stonehenge car park, which is gone now. Now there's some monorail to get there, or there's like a tram, a light rail. There was a car park, and there are post holes, and they date from 8000 BC. And do you know what the archaeologists say? They say this is a coincidence, and that culture is not linked. Whatever culture that did that is not linked to whatever culture did Stonehenge. But I think it's the same culture. It's just people always used it.
Wow. Well, I tell you what, I'm having a hard time finding the section that I wanted to play. So what I will do is I'm going to go ahead and jump forward to 1 hour and 17 minutes in this documentary. And I just want to play this for literally 1.5 minutes. And then where they explain how the pyramid itself incorporates the speed of light, which I didn't know and I thought was pretty fascinating. So once I get past this, I'm going to turn it back over to you. I don't want to take up any more of your time. I'm really excited to get into the material that you have to present. And pardon me for my lack of professionality here, but it is what it is. This is we're doing our best here. So here we go. I'm going to play this for about 1.5 minutes.
Cosmic balance, and being a part of this cosmic balance was the duty and wish of every Egyptian.
But if we abandon the conventional beliefs of archaeologists, there's an alternative explanation that may get us closer to the truth. There's a reason to bring huge granite blocks 500 miles to Giza. Granite has one unique property. It doesn't change over time. Its dimensions remain the same. This means the Great Pyramid secrets could be transmitted through the ages. My anonymous friend drew 2 circles, one outside and one inside the base of the pyramid. He subtracted the length of the inside circle from the length of the outer circle.
Take this figure to a physicist.
That's odd. That's the speed of light. No doubt about it.
This is the speed of light in millions of meters per second. This is the number from the pyramid.
I've nothing else to say.
Scientists may find these truths unpalatable, but they are hard to deny. Are they embarrassed by these revelations?
If we look at the Great Pyramid without prejudice, with a fresh eye, and when you're a physicist, you measure and you notice many things like that. Coincidences, I suppose, but so many coincidences with such a big object. It's very disturbing.
All right, so there you go. The speed of light is incorporated into the Great Pyramid, something I was not aware of.
Well, that's amazing, but it's also not surprising. Firstly, we have to ask if the proper ratios were used, because people do use different ratios when they're talking about the Great Pyramid, and the historical ones are different to today's ones. There's also a question of whether you measure from the anchor stones. There are anchor stones on the 4 corners of the pyramid, or whether you measure from the first of the ascending stones. But that wouldn't surprise me at all. In fact, I think that the Great Pyramid was probably built based on the plans of some earlier structure, and that would explain the precision of some of the corridors. I might talk about that later. Incorporating the speed of light, absolutely. The thing is, our civilization it is a very old one, but it was interrupted by a series of catastrophes, which every ancient culture talks about. And they talk about some high culture before this. But these catastrophes were absolutely enormous. I was looking into some of the details of what caused the Carolina Bays, and they say the impacts were like 20,000 Tunguskas. So can you imagine how devastating that would be? 1 Tunguska could wipe out the Eurasian economy if it hit, a major city. But imagine if you have all these thousands and tens of thousands of Tunguskis smashing into Earth. They smashed into the northern hemisphere, and they didn't quite. I don't think the impacts quite reached as far as India, and that would explain why India talks about these Vimanas and all these ancient technologies. And look, if they had the Vimanas and everything, yes, they knew the speed of light. And Egypt, they knew about this as well. Egypt, India, all these countries were not affected by the ice age, if there was an ice age, because there were no ice sheets there, and the civilization was continuous.
Can you guys hear me right now?
Yep.
Yep.
Did you see the message that I just got?
From...
You'll have to read it to me.
Well, it was on the screen for me just a moment ago. It said this hangout will end if you continue to use it. This hangout on air will end if you continue broadcasting content you aren't authorized to use.
Wow.
I've never gotten that before.
Wow. So they're giving you a notice now.
They're really cracking down. Wow. I mean, this is fair use, man. Isn't that what the fair use laws are about? This is for commentary and education. We're not monetized. Wow.
Wow.
Okay, Charles. So I guess I'm not authorized to use other people's material anymore. That's a real bummer. However,
well, we can. Yeah.
However, we have Charles Kos, who no doubt has a whole library of his own material to use.
Well, absolutely, absolutely.
So I'm going to stop screen sharing, and I am going to turn this over to our wonderful special guest here. I think I'm done sharing. Am I done sharing? Let me get rid of this.
I just wanted to ask you something really quick, Charles.
Go for it.
If I took geology in college, so I learned that there was Pangea, right? The whole supercontinent.
Yes, yes.
So, I'm kind of under the assumption maybe these pyramids were all built when it was just one continent for some reason. What do you think?
Well,
about it?
it's funny you say that. There is evidence for a sort of recent splitting of the continents. There was some Indian guy about 10 years ago, and I saw a press release. He wrote a book saying that the continents have only split recently, and this would explain why you have Australoids in India and also Australoids in Australia. It's not because they traveled from India to Australia. It's because these countries sort of branched off from each other within human history, and I thought that was a very interesting argument. It's a bit complicated. The problem with the argument is the radiation datings that geologists use, and these seem to show that all this happened, a long time ago. But the fact is we don't really know.
Now, there's a big question mark behind carbon dating as well. Don't you agree?
Well, actually, absolutely. I mean, I was looking at some carbon dates of the pyramids before I came to this chat, and it's rather odd. Lots of them seem to date to about 2100 BC. With regards to the carbon found in mortar, and I'm even talking about the Pyramid of Zoser, which should be 2700, 2600. Even parts of the Great Pyramid date to 2100. Then again, there are some datings to 2500. It's so odd. The datings actually date to too recently, which I find quite interesting.
So,
even by orthodox standards, the datings are not quite correct. Yeah,
well, that's what I've come to realize. That, well, I've seen a lot of people mention that they can only date back so far, and then the rest is just a guess based on the first the amount that they can actually record, right? It's only an estimate from that point.
Well, that's the thing. The thing with carbon dating is, yes, it's not quite accurate, and the problem is, as carbon 14, I think it has a half-life of something like 60,000 years. So that means you cannot date anything older than 60,000 years. And surprise, surprise, that's why they say the first humans are all 60,000 years. Every time they find a skeleton that could be 120,000 years, they say 50,000, 60,000 years. And the other thing is, the earlier you go, the less accurate the ratio, the less accuracy you have in the measurement of the ratio of decay. So the wilder the readings you can get. So
Right.
yes, there are problems with it. It's just an indication, really. And yeah, it shouldn't be taken as a gospel, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And there's still absolutely no way to date when any particular stone was actually carved, right?
Actually, there is. In a new book by Robert Temple, it's not so new now, Egyptian Dawn 2010, he was working with an Italian professor who had a new way of dating stone. So what happened was, and what you can do is, the stone retains the information of the last time it was exposed to sunlight. So you can take a piece of stone which has been placed, and it's, say, inside the pyramid, and you can date that. And what he did, he went into the Osiris shaft behind the Sphinx, and he dated part of the Menkaure pyramid, and they found that the Menkaure pyramid, this is only one reading, but they found that it dated to 3000 BC. And this sort of confirmed Robert Temple's own views that the Great Pyramid is, in fact, a lot older than the Old Kingdom. That's basically pre-dynastic, first dynasty stuff. So it shows you that people have been tampering with the Great Pyramid or modifying it or something, but it's actually a much older structure than the Old Kingdom.
But you don't actually believe that it's really that young.
Well, part of it is because the Egyptians would have renovated it many times. I think they wouldn't have left it alone. They would have changed it, tampered with it. We know that Khufu tampered with the Sphinx. The Sphinx is very old. I think a lot of the Great Pyramid is of that era, but the thing is, if it incorporates speed of light, measurements of the Earth, it's using a much older knowledge. So I think if it is young, it's based on an older structure. They've reworked it, and they've renovated it, and this skews the dating. So we're actually dating the renovation, not the earlier structure. As for the inside of the Great Pyramid, guess what? It hasn't been dated. They were unable to find any mortar. They found mortar on the casing stones, but they found no mortar inside the pyramid. They were unable to date the interior. We don't know how old that stuff in the King's Chamber is. Those incredible shafts, descending shafts, they're just amazing. And they're of uncertain date. I don't think it was built all at once. It couldn't have been built all at once. It was too much. It was built in layers. And this is how Mexican pyramids were built as well.
So do you have any thoughts on why there's still to this day, there's a discrepancy in the length, the actual precise measurement of what a cubit is supposed to be?
The reason...
Between 52 and 53 centimeters, the argument continues?
Okay, the reason was Stone Age people were using it and they didn't have an accurate measure, and it was different. Every city in Greece actually had a different measure. And with regards to the cubits, I saw something rather interesting in a book called, it's by that British Lee Lines guy, A New View Over Atlantis. And it seems that the Great Pyramid is, a more accurate measure would be Greek feet rather than cubits. It may not even be made in cubits. It may have been designed using feet. And this is rather interesting because it suggests that the people using cubits may not have built the Great Pyramid. And I find that quite fascinating.
Didn't they use metric before they used imperial?
I think they used both. Yeah, the Sumerians had a half-meter measure, which I think it's something like 0.502 or 0.51 or 0.52 of a meter. And that's amazing. And the other thing, metric is based on the design of the Earth.
Yeah.
So it could have been arrived at, exactly, it could have been arrived at independently by people in ancient times and people in modern times in France measuring the Earth. I think it's, I think a meter is something like 1/10,000th or 1/100,000th of the distance between the pole and the equator, and any base 10 civilization in ancient times could have done the same thing. Or it's continuity. There is some mystery there. Certainly the imperial units of Britain, there is continuity with ancient Egypt for sure. Even Newton was clued into this. He was investigating this for half of his life. He thought this was astounding. And he was desperate for accurate measures of the Great Pyramid, in fact, because he thought these would verify the British imperial system. He was in charge of currency, and I think he had some input into the measures and weights, and he wanted to know what was going on inside the Great Pyramid, because he thought this was something left over from a previous civilization as well.
So, with the considerations of the extraordinarily precise measurements inside and out of the pyramid itself, literally every aspect of the pyramid is extraordinarily precise, incorporating the pi and the phi ratios all over it. To me, that screams overwhelmingly, it screams resonance. You know, I mean, I'm a musician and I understand frequency and resonance and proportions. And I also understand that a lot of the ancient and the older cathedrals were built on the phi ratio. And inside the cathedrals, you know, when the choir would sing or whatever, that they had that the resonance that would occur inside that building as a result. I mean, they even spaced the windows with the phi proportion, the height, the width of the windows, the doorways, the height of the ceiling, the width of the floor, the length of the building. These are all built on the 1 to 1.618 ratio, the phi, the golden mean. So again, that just screams resonance to me. I mean, thoughts on that?
Well, there's a number of possibilities. And firstly, that's a very interesting observation, because you have the musical perspective. I hadn't heard of the idea of the Great Pyramid in relation to the music perspective, but I suppose whoever built it would have had a highly developed musical civilization as well. And of course, everything is gone. There was a huge library in Heliopolis, all gone, all wiped out. You know, we don't even have the Library of Alexandria. Why would we have the Library of Heliopolis? But that was used to build the Great Pyramid. As for the phi being included, that suggests, again, there was a library that they decided to use. For some reason, it may have been sacred to them to use that. Additionally, there might have been a different type of human brain in different times, which was more sensitive to resonance. And it seems that humans were actually a bit different in the olden times, and they were more clued into this kind of thing. Alternately, I think that this might have come about, because they had different brains and they were actually interested in incorporating this. It could even have come about because in some ways by accident, because they thought, okay, this is the most beautiful, stable structure I can dream of, so therefore I'm going to build it. But eventually, they would have worked out phi, of course.
I've also seen some experiments that were done in some of the ancient, or I don't want to say ancient, but some of the older cathedrals that incorporate the phi ratio. And this also relates to St. Peter's Basilica and some of the other structures in Rome, like the the Parthenon. There are places, very specific places, that you can stand in the cathedral where you get the convergence of the sound waves, and you can literally feel it in your bones. And when you take one step in any direction, then you're out of that parameter, you're out of that field. It's just it's one location, very, very specific. Usually
You're
it's
talking
only
about an amphitheater.
No, I'm talking about cathedrals specifically. And I know how amphitheaters,
It works the same way, right?
Very much. Very much.
Yeah,
But
where you stand right in the middle, and if you move away, it'll...
But the sound waves bounce around in such a way that there is usually one particular location where the sound is just amplified 3, 4, 5, 10 times what it would normally be anywhere else in location inside. Pretty remarkable stuff.
Well, that's
they had one of those in my college where you'd stand right in the middle and your voice would amplify completely, and then you step one step away from it and it would quieten down.
Yeah, that's amazing, because you wouldn't think of a Gothic cathedral as having those properties, because they always teach us it's the amphitheaters, you know, for those Greek plays that had those properties. But I suppose you must be right, because they had their choirs, and they would have incorporated that into the design as well. They were obsessed in the Middle Ages with choral music. There wasn't much else to do. Back then, there was no television, and they would have made sure that churches were very resonant. Yeah, that's one of the lost arts.
Well, I'm sure that you're aware of the work of Chris Dunn, and I'm sure you're aware probably of the work of a lot of other people who suggest that the Great Pyramid was a machine of some sort. A lot of suggestions that it was a transmitter, it was a receiver, that, you know, Chris Dunn, he found, what was it? He found the residue was a hydroxide or sodium hydroxide residue, suggesting that the water chamber below was a low frequency resonator. There are other suggestions that the Great Pyramid was actually a nuclear reactor. I'm not sure if you've heard of that one before, but I have a theory of my own that I'll throw at you. The Ark of the Covenant, which has been described as some sort of capacitor, some sort of energy device. That, you know, the stories are you get too close to it and you'll exhibit signs of radiation sickness, that some people would have been killed on contact. And then we have this concept that the pyramid itself is some sort of energy machine. And we know that there are pieces missing from the Great Pyramid. So what do you think of the idea that the Ark of the Covenant is literally the main ingredient, the key missing element that would make the pyramid work and function properly?
Could well be. The Ark of the Covenant is an incredible device. It must have been tens of thousands of years when it was discovered. It could well have been discovered inside the Great Pyramid, because it's the same dimensions as the king's sarcophagus. The king's sarcophagus was a kind of box, and you could even think of the pyramid as a kind of containment device for the Ark of the Covenant to make sure it doesn't fall into the wrong hands. And, you know, it actually says in the Bible that when they opened the Ark of the Covenant, 50,000 people died as a result of that. And you think, what could have caused that? And yes, there was some electrical phenomena associated with the Ark. There was some kind of nuclear technology in there, some kind of fusion power in there. I think it was tampering with our genetics. It was some kind of virus. I think it was opened possibly for the first time in 2000 BC, because this is the time of the collapse of the Old Kingdom. We have the Epure Papyrus. Have you heard of the Epure Papyrus?
No.
It talks about the plagues of Egypt, but it's written by an Egyptian, and he says the river is blood. He doesn't mention the Israelites, but he says there's catastrophe after catastrophe. There is only darkness in the land. A brother does not know his brother, and it's just endless woe and lamentations. And this is the time of the first intermediate period when possibly the Great Pyramid was opened. The previous head of the Sphinx was knocked off during this time, according to Robert Temple. I think that's a great idea. The Great Pyramid was opened, it was ransacked, so we're talking 2000 BC, and this is when they got the Ark of the Covenant out of I think they got it out of the pyramid. That's where it was kept. It could have been kept somewhere deep in the pyramid, in an older part of the pyramid, much older than perhaps the outer layers, if the outer layers are newer. In the Indus Valley, something bad happened in 2000 BC. I'm sure you'll be aware that they talk about ancient nuclear devices being used in the Indus Valley, because there was a report from the 1970s. There was a French expedition there and they detected radiation. Subsequent expeditions were unable to detect radiation there. I'm not sure whether they were measuring radioactive rocks or what it was, but anyway, they say people were lying in the street, found lying in the street holding hands, ancient skeletons, as if something had suddenly overcame them with death. They were overcome with death and they just died where they were, and the city was immediately abandoned. And I'm thinking, was this the same event as the plagues of Egypt, which may have been 2000 BC, if we dissociate them from the Exodus, which was supposedly in 1300 BC, and date them a bit earlier? Were they the same event? Was this some kind of genetic weapon? Is there some genetic weapon inside the Ark And where is the Ark today? If this is the case, is it still in Ethiopia as they claim? I've been reading this this book here. It's just an unbelievable book. I'm just reaching over the Kebra Nagast. It's the holy book of Ethiopia, and they talk about how they stole this Ark. The Queen of Sheba stole this Ark from King Solomon, and King Solomon sort of chased after them, a bit like the Egyptians chasing after the Israelites, but they didn't get it back, and it remains in Ethiopia to this day, apparently.
Okay, so let me see. Considering that, we've been talking about the pyramid as some sort of energy device, the Ark of the Covenant being an energy device. Probably, I guess you're aware that the word itself, pyramid, means fire in the middle.
Exactly. Exactly. There is something energetic going on with the Great Pyramid. And Samir Osmanengik, the Bosnian pyramids guy, has talked about this as well. He's talked about energetics. If you look at an infrared picture of the Great Pyramid, you will see there is more heat concentrated towards the apex, towards the tip. And there is a controversial photo of an energy beam with what looked like DNA strands around it of light beaming upwards. And I don't know much about that photo. I think it's an infrared photo. And yes, it must be something that we cannot yet understand, because I don't think anyone has been able to explain that.
Charles, there's also the blacking markings along inside some of the corridors throughout the pyramid as well. Black markings along the walls. And that looks like almost power burns from something.
It could well be. There was a Frenchman who wrote a book about the building of the pyramid. I can't remember the name. And he suggested that the Grand Gallery is in fact an elevator. He suggested it's an elevator shaft. And he suggested this was for raising blocks up into the pyramid. So during the construction, it could have been an elevator for transporting anything. We don't know what it was for. With regards,
that theory to me doesn't make any sense whatsoever, considering the dimensions, and also considering that anything they needed to put inside, they could have easily done during the construction before it was finished and enclosed. I mean, this Grand Gallery starts very small and then all of a sudden gets very tall for no apparent reason.
I think that's a very good point. That's the thing. It is a little bit too small for the building of the Great Pyramid. Exactly. It may have been used for. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
A lot of people would have to go in there too. Like, where are they all going to move around? And
And also on the side, on the floor, on near the wall, there is slots in the floor, as though there was something that used to be there. As we know, many elements from inside are missing. So perhaps, I don't know, some sort of Tesla resonators, who knows what's fit inside those, rectangular slots in the floor going up on the side of the Grand Gallery.
Exactly. Yes, there could well have been something in there. It's so hard to say because our technology is just so primitive. It's just so backwards. I have a feeling the whole pyramid is based off something based off a machine, or even they tried to rebuild an ancient machine out of stone, which we cannot understand. It's just a bit beyond us, and they were beyond us. They had their Vimvanas, their amazing technologies.
So what do you think about the residue that was found by Chris Dunn? I think it was sodium hydroxide residue on some of the what have been called by mainstream Egyptologists as air shafts. He found some I think it's sodium hydroxide residue.
Well, that's alchemy in action, because that's the name of Egypt, Alchem, the black land, the black substance.
And what's the word kemet? What is that? It's
kemet. I'm not sure. Chem certainly. I think it's black.
No, I mean there's a word in Egypt, in Egyptology, known as kemet, the school of kemet.
Oh yes, yes.
Okay, I'm associating that because you said alchemy, and the two words just clicked for me, and so I'm curious. I wonder if that's just a spin-off, another cultural version of the same word.
Well, it would be, I believe it comes from the fact that Egypt was called Chem, and people who referred to the science coming out of Egypt as chemists, people who were schooled in, yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay, that's interesting. So maybe there is an association between alchemy and chematology or chemistry.
Absolutely, absolutely. People today have a warped view of alchemy. I think they think alchemy must be transmutation, must be turning lead into gold.
Right.
But actually, that just because that was popular with medieval kings doesn't mean that was actually what it was. It was a whole science, you know. It was all of chemistry that we have today.
Yeah.
As for sodium hydroxide, Chris Dunn's theory is interesting. I'm personally not convinced by it because I think I'm not convinced that the energy output would be enough to justify the building of such a huge structure. And I'd also love to see a scale model in action of what he proposes. I'd love to see that before I would be totally convinced. Yeah.
Charles, earlier you mentioned the ley lines, correct? So
Yes.
you're familiar with the ley line. Now, when I look at the ley line map, so to speak, the one that it shows all of the ley lines meet at the Giza Plateau, correct? A whole bunch of them meet at one spot.
True. That Middle Eastern map, it's not as good as some of the ones in Europe with regards to the number of points that intersect. But yeah, that's true.
Okay, so what is your thoughts on the pyramids are power generators? They use free energy, and in the shape of it and the design and pi included in the design, they're able to harness free energy and able to levitate stones and be able to create these things.
The pyramids are located on a plateau, and there is a fair weather current between the ground and the bottom of the troposphere of 300,000 volts. And this is something that Tesla was trying to tap into in order to, I suppose, harness free energy. He wanted to beam energy around the world the way we're beaming Wi-Fi around the world at the moment. He saw that in terms of energy. Can you imagine how fried we would be if that was happening? We would be cooked inside, I suppose, if we did it wrongly. But I think the pre-Egyptians certainly had something along the lines of that dream of Tesla's. And it's rather interesting because it's inescapable. If you look at that infrared picture of the pyramid, you see that there is something going on. And that could be generated simply from the ratios of the pyramid, because phi, what is phi really? Phi is the golden
number.
Yeah, it's the golden number, but the Fibonacci ratio, it's everywhere. And the reason it's everywhere is because the electric universe is generating it everywhere.
Right.
So
wow, this is great.
Yep. It would therefore be generate.
I agree. Go ahead, please.
It would therefore be used to generate electricity of its own accord, because what phi really is, it's the orbit of a spiral of energy orbiting around itself. And this is why it's generating everywhere. It generates the structure of our hands, the shape of our bodies, the shape of our heads. Everything is generated electrically. So the Egyptians pre-Egyptians may certainly have been well aware of this, well aware, much more than we today, of this property of phi, the fact that it ties so well into the electric universe. That's what I'm so impressed about. And that's why they were obsessed with this number, because they thought by using phi, it's almost like generating life.
Yeah.
And of course, yep.
Now, my theory kinda is that we had a technology and somebody or something took it all away from us.
Yes.
That's what I kind of think.
Yes, definitely. Okay, there's a number of reasons. Firstly, the human brain has shrank. Some of these Cro-Magnons, the Boskop people, there was even a race in Morocco which had enormous heads, pushing 2,000 cubic centimeters. Currently, we're about 1,300, 1,400, you see, and the biggest brains of today are about 1,600. So these people were much smarter than us. They had much more, just a huge amount of brain matter. They could build a spaceship. Certainly they could. They were designing spaceships like we do crosswords. Even if they couldn't fly them, they were designing them, and they were trying to build them. So they were an amazing people. As for the catastrophes, look, 70,000 years ago, the Toba eruption, and geneticists talk about a population bottleneck in all creatures after that event. So what that means is that suddenly a catastrophe overwhelmed the Earth. It could have been the Toba volcano in Indonesia. Currently, there's some doubt being shed on that. They couldn't find the sediment of that in Africa, so they're not sure. But something happened, and it just shrunk the number of everything on Earth. I think it could have been the end of the last super civilization, the way this one is going to end in genetic disaster, basically pollution, overpopulation, something like that, something disease related. But of course, after that, we were trying to rebuild. There may have been a skerix of the past super civilization. Some countries may have been more advanced than others, still possessing a kind of spaceship. Other countries were in the Stone Age. India was advanced for a very long time. That's why they retained the information. But then, of course, we had another catastrophe, didn't we? 12,000 years ago, known as, I suppose, the deluge, also known as the flood. But I suppose deluge can also mean a succession of disasters, can't it? So it can mean a succession of catastrophes, and that erased human memory.
I remember reading portions of Plato's Timaeus where he describes speaking with Egyptian priests, and the Egyptian priests, because of course Plato was Greek, the Egyptian priest said to the Greek Plato, he said that you, even as old, and of course I'm paraphrasing, he says, even as old as you and your culture is, you have to begin again like children.
Absolutely, absolutely. So the Egyptians were aware of this, and they were even aware of this on a more limited time scale. And as for what that man was talking about, Plutarch said his name was Sonkis, that priest, or Sonchis. And he may have been talking about, see, he was talking about 9,000 years in the past, so he could well have been talking about the catastrophe of 12,000 years ago. Or he could have been talking about 9,000 moon years, which would place it about the time of the Sea Peoples, which was another sort of deluge, quote unquote, but a deluge of people swarming Europe and destroying everything. So he may have been referring to the fact that the Greeks forgot about the Mycenaean era, which was the Greeks called the Achaean era, or he might have been talking about something far older. And the stuff that gets kept in temples, that priest had access to information in Egyptian temples, which could have been tens of thousands of years old, because that's how far those histories go. They say that before the Egyptian tribes were in Egypt ruling, there was a dynasty of spirits of the dead, they called them. Then there was a dynasty of demigods, which I am guessing correspond to the Nephilim. Then there was a dynasty of gods, which would correspond to what in the Bible are the gods who came from heaven, supposedly, and inseminated the earthly women. I think this was a super advanced culture arriving in spaceships and colonizing. I think it was something like that. And yeah, it's amazing how far that stuff goes back. You see what's in these, do you know what's in some Tibetan temples? Vimana texts. They have texts from 60,000 years ago. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Yep, go on.
No, please. I mean, you can absolutely continue. I was just going to add that bit of our history actually corresponds with the Greek mythology of the demigods fighting and taking control from the gods, right? Wasn't it Zeus and Jupiter battled Kronos, right? Kronos was his son was Zeus, his two sons were Zeus and Jupiter.
Yes. Yep.
And you know, the whole story of the locking the gods away in Tartarus, and you know, that whole Greek mythology of the battle, right? The battle of the Titans, right?
Exactly. We have things like this from Greece, but we don't have them from, say, Britain or Northern Europe, I suppose, because of the Ice Age. And the Ice Age interrupted all that and got in the way of all the ancient memories, and people shifted to latitudes closer to the equator. But of course, these are histories which have been reinterpreted by priests in terms of mythology, but they are actually ancient histories. If you look at the Bible, even the Bible is history. interpret it as religion. It is all history. It is chronicles. The books are even called chronicles. You know, it's amazing, and that's what it seeks to be. That's why it was passed down, because these are histories of what the ancestors did. And yeah, it probably refers to an ancient technological war for sure.
So do you have your own theories or ideas about the possibility or the purpose of the 8-sided pyramid, since the Great Pyramid was recently discovered to have had 8 sides to it? It's slightly parabolic.
Well, yes. Well, firstly, there's, of course, the engineering explanation, which is that the sides were unlikely to explode outwards if they have that concavity to them. It pushes the forces towards the edges, towards the anchor stones on the 4 corners, towards those apexes, and it redistributes the pressure, essentially, of the gravity of the pyramid, pushing down on itself. And yeah, as for other, it does have optical properties. That's the thing. I believe, and this is new information that I read in Robert Temple, he actually discovered that, I think it was during an equinox, at the crack of dawn, the sun flashed against one of the sides of the pyramids.
Yeah, it's the equinox.
Yes. And see, this is interesting, because for generations, people have only associated archaeoastronomy with Stonehenge. No one thought that people were looking for mathematical ratios in Giza for 400 years, or perhaps even longer. Even Newton was looking for mathematical ratios, but no one was looking for archaeoastronomy at Giza. So they would have that extra purpose of being an optical effect, a light effect, to usher in the new year. We can measure years from equinoxes. That's how they did it in the old days. I think the Romans under Julius, they started measuring the year based on solstices instead. But I think the Stonehenges, they used solstices as well. I think that was the Atlantean way of doing things, using solstices. Equinoctial stuff was possibly from Asia. Norman Lockyer, who wrote The Dawn of Astronomy, he said the reason that pyramids face northeast, southwest are so that they face the equinoxes, because, of course, on the equinox, it doesn't matter where you are on the Earth, sunrise and sunset are going to be due east and due west.
So on that note, as I was mentioning earlier, and I was trying to find the segment of that documentary where they show all these cultures and ancient megalithic sites around the world that all fall on this one line that's about 100 miles wide, circumnavigates the entire globe, and all of the major sites, all of them fall right on this line, and suggesting that that line might have been a the equator, that before perhaps the Earth shifted and moved. Now, on that note, I would suggest that may not have been the case, simply because the current setup of the Giza pyramids are still to this very day within, what is it, 1/1000th of an inch or 5/100ths of an inch away from being directly aligned with magnetic north. So, I mean, I'm only thinking that if there was some sort of massive shift in the Earth's tilt, then that alignment would not be true today.
That's the thing. I think there was a shift. It's a bit tricky. I mean, some people say that when they built the pyramids, Polaris was actually a bit out of position. So they actually got it right without knowing about Polaris, which is quite interesting. But yeah, as you say, the problem is there's so many variables in what we're talking about, so it's hard to hold one still while we're trying to move the other ones around, I suppose.
On that, considering that we are talking about ancient cultures that did have extreme precise astrological knowledge, I mean, for instance, the Mayans, that they mapped to the very day this 26,920 year cycle, which is our precession, the wobble of our axis, and they had that marked to the very day. So considering that these cultures had such precise knowledge of the equinox, the cycles of the wobble being 25,920 years, perhaps I'm speculating here, Maybe they knew that Polaris was going to soon be the central rotational point of the northern stars. Maybe they built it in anticipation of the upcoming shift.
Well, that would be amazing. That would be extraordinary. I think that could be certainly the case. Yeah, could be. Could be.
I mean, if they were so good at knowing the motions of all the astronomical bodies, then they could have very easily said, yeah, in 1,000 years, this thing's going to line up perfectly. You know what I mean?
Absolutely. I mean, you look at Stonehenge, apparently it tracks the moon over a 19-year period. And so these were incredibly patient people, and they had a huge amount of knowledge behind them. The priests, it's so strange. The Druids didn't want to write anything down, and I wonder why. I'm wondering now if that is because of the last catastrophe, that the gods basically incinerated everything on Earth, so they thought, okay, it's good if the gods don't want us to have this knowledge. The gods have taken it away from us, so we have to pass everything just by word of mouth. But with Stonehenge, it's like the pyramids. It's got so much information in that structure that they must have had libraries. They must have had a huge body of knowledge to back that up, but we don't have anything. And I think one of the reasons for that is the same reason that people used to say in the 19th century that the Earth is 6,000 years old, because some catastrophe must have occurred in that time. And that was the final straw of the last civilization. That's when we had to start again, as that Egyptian priest points out. Something overtook the Earth for decades, and everyone forgot about the existence of the past civilization.
Fascinating stuff, man. Fascinating. Do you want to go ahead and maybe, do you have some sort of anything that you've prepared, or do you just want to continue having a casual chat? I've got still pages of notes to go through. And
Let's finish up the notes, because I'm curious. Yeah, let's do it. Another thing I want to mention, this 6,000 years ago thing, that do you know archaeologists today are still in this paradigm of a young Earth? They still act as if the Earth is 6,000 years old, because they refuse to acknowledge any civilization older than Egypt. They are not calling Göbekli Tepe civilization. It clearly was. They had stonemasonry, and to do that, you have division of labor. You have people who are living off a diet which enables which other people have harvested. Which it implies there's an economy. It implies there's a civilization. They won't talk about that. And in the 19th century, of course, we were, all the schools talked about young Earth, and it's just so interesting that archaeology is still in that pattern. Please go on with your notes.
Okay. A moment ago, you had said something about the alignments and on the sides of the pyramid with the way the sun rises and the lighting. On that note, before I forget, because I'm going to put this page aside as soon as I get done with this one. There's a lot of speculation. This is slightly off topic. The knobs, the protrusions on some of the megalithic stones, particularly the Cyclopean stonework of Ollantaytambo Tombo, and some of the other, the places in Peru with these strange knobs that protrude off the bottoms of these stones. There's tons and tons of head scratching going on about that. I'm wondering, have you heard of the theory or idea that those knobs they served a similar purpose as the alignment of the pyramid on the equinox, where you can see clearly the shadow of the 8 sides, but only on that day, on a specific day of the year. So some people have found that certain, perhaps not all, but some of these knobs that nobody seems to know why they're still there, on these walls and megalithic stone structures, that they cast shadows on the wall, and the shadows line up with other notches or knobs on the wall that would indicate a specific time of year, like an equinox, for instance.
I've heard of that theory, and I believe I've watched that video on YouTube that talks about that. It's got some Peruvian discussing his research, and that he's found out all this stuff. It's interesting. Firstly, knobs. If we look at the quipu is the writing of the Peruvians in strings, and those are actually knobs on a string. So they used knobs for retaining information. This was how they retained data. It's interesting. If this is so, and I believe it is, it's been proven that what you say is true. It looks like they used these knobs to retain data which could only be accessed astronomically. So, like you say, it had to be a certain day, a certain time, and this would cast a certain shadow. And I'm wondering what sort of shape of the larger shadow would be cast. What sort of shape would that reveal?
Interesting. Okay, just wanted to get your take on that, because I think we're talking about the same video, the Peruvian archaeologist who showed that little booklet of photos of his.
Yep,
really, really interesting. I think he's probably correct. The only question I have on that note is that in some places on some of those walls, the knobs are very, very low to the ground, and there's really nothing that the shadow would point to. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there appear to be two types of knobs. Those astronomical knobs, which are on the wall at a height that a human can access at head height. And as you say, those ones on the walls, and some of those ones are huge, and you see them also in Egypt, and I believe even Greek architecture at the Temple of Delphi. I think there are some of those as well. And I suppose they were for lifting the stones, moving them around. I think personally it was all geopolymer, and that's how they got everything to fit together. But they may not have been cast in place. They may have been cast in a sort of quarry, quote unquote, which was in a fluid shape and then somehow transported nearby. I think these Inca quarries, they're right next to the stone walls. Well, I think it's the reason they're right next to the walls is because either they didn't want to shift things very far, which is a bit unusual considering they're a culture which could obviously shift enormous stones, or that's the leftover chemical slurry of the mixture that constituted the walls. So I don't know what those knobs are for. It's a mystery.
Well, on the note of geopolymer, there's no doubt geopolymers were used even in granite form. And there's an image, if I can find it before we end the show, I'll try to find it. And you may have already seen it, but there's an image. I think it's in the Holy of Holies, where it has a red granite walls in that space, and there's a section missing, and you can see it looks like it's only maybe an inch or 2 inches thick, and behind it is a smaller. Again, they're cyclopean, or they are. Pardon me, the word has escaped me right now for the irregular shaped stones. The polygonal shaped bricks that fill the space behind this what looks like a solid piece of granite, but there's a small piece that's just chipped away or fallen or missing, and you can see that there's like brickwork behind it. And this is in the Holy of Holies in Egypt. So it's a red granite wall that has revealed that it's actually not a solid piece of granite, that it's more likely it's a granite polymer.
Yep. I think I'm familiar with that, and that's absolutely amazing because it sort of explains some of the stuff that's going on in Peru. Because as we know, the stones in Peru look a lot like some of the so-called Old Kingdom stones in Egypt, and they say that the stones in Peru are a type of andesite. They say this is final. We've decided it's andesite, but of course the geologists cannot replicate the fact that these stones are pushed together. And they have the most unlikely curves, and they're pushed together precisely, which shows they were partly cast. Clearly, that's the only way you can fit them together, unless you have a supercomputer 3D printing the stones into precise shapes, and then you sort of squeeze them together. Exactly, yeah.
No, there's look, I'm a contractor. Okay, I'm a remodeling contractor. I have worked with stone. I have worked. And many years ago, I was a welder. I've worked with steel. I welded stainless steel. I've worked with tons and tons of materials. I do construction. I fix things. I build things. And I can tell you from my experience, there's no effing way, as you said, without 3D printing, very high tech, very precise machinery, there's no way you're going to get those strange shapes to fit together so tightly. No way, without molding one on top of the other, or perhaps working with something that's soft like clay that would press into place.
Well,
that's
isn't that where sound vibration technology would come into play, where you could actually change the state of the matter by sound vibrations just by looking at somatics itself?
See, I'm glad you brought that up, Ian, because I wanted to ask Charles also. Charles, are you familiar with the Hutchison effect?
Yes.
You're familiar with that guy, Hutchison?
Isn't that when an electric charge causes poltergeist-like phenomena? It causes objects to move?
I forget his first name. Maybe somebody in the chat will remind me. His last name is Hutchison, and he did these experiments in his garage or in his basement, and he was able to levitate all manner of things, from bowling balls to wrenches to liquids. He was able to take solid chunks of metal and then have them literally deteriorate right before your eyes. He was using some sort of, he had a whole basement or garage full of electronic equipment, and he was using some sort of sound or electrical or magnetic resonance. And it was just, I mean, if you're not familiar with Hutchison, that's something you should probably get familiar with, because I think it might pertain to what we're talking about. Like Ian said, there might be a way of perhaps
manipulating the sacred geometry itself to change the state of the matter through sound vibration and electromagnetic frequencies.
Yeah, Ian, while we're talking, maybe you could dig up a short video on Hutchison, and we can show while we're talking here. In the meantime, I want to ask you, Charles, are you familiar with a culture, an ancient, extremely ancient culture known as the Pelasgians?
Pelasgians, yes. They're the pre-Greeks. And they may be the Minoan culture. I'm not quite sure. I did a bit of work on them. And
the only person I've ever spoken to who was familiar. So please tell us what you know about the Pelasgians.
Well, okay. I believe the Pelasgians could be related to the pre-Egyptians. They were living in Crete. Crete was referred to as Keftiu in the Bible. And in the Bible, it actually says that these Keftiu are of the tribe of Ham, which comes from Egypt, comes from Africa, the Egyptians being Hamites. And yes, they may be the pre-Egyptians, and they may have existed on the continent in Greece, and I think they were forced out of Greece by the Mycenaeans. I think the Mycenaeans were a kind of Viking-like tribe who charged in from the north, took over Greece. And the Pelasgians, they were in Troy. I think they relocated to Britain, because in the ancient British mythology, which is really history, it says that basically there was one migration which left the Hittite Empire, left Greece, and they went to found Rome. They took over Latin tribes in Rome, and the reason they're on the side of Italy that they are is because the other side had Greek cities, so they had to go to the other side of Italy, found a colony there. Another colony went to take over Britain, and they said, let's go take over Britain, because in Britain there's only a few giants living there. This is in Geoffrey of Monmouth. And I suppose those giants, because they're on the continental periphery in Britain, Scandinavia, giant-like people, they're the relic of the previous people who were building all the technologies. And I think the Pelasgians took over and conquered Britain, and today their language could be similar to Welsh.
Interesting. Are you also familiar with unfortunately, the late researcher known as David Flynn?
I'm not, sorry.
Okay, amazing, unbelievable researcher. There's a book you should probably get your hands on. Actually, it's a two-book series that I have. One is called The Temple at the Center of Time. Absolutely remarkable book about the temple in Jerusalem and how it is associated with other locations around the world. And the association is the distance from Jerusalem, or the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, to certain other locations. The distance, for instance, gosh, I'm trying to go off of memory. It's a book I read a long time ago. The distance it relates to a specific period of time, and there's just numerous examples of, for instance, if it's 1,800 nautical miles from I'll say 1,948 nautical miles from Temple Mount in Jerusalem to London. Okay, so 1,948 nautical miles. Well, Jerusalem was founded and given by the hands of England in 1948.
Yep.
You know what I mean? So there's all these strange, really amazing relationship. The other book is called Cydonia, The Secret Chronicles of Mars. And the reason I bring up David Flynn is because in his book Cydonia, he mentions the Pelasgians, which is where I learned of these people. And he says that according to the ancient Greeks, that the people known as the Pelasgians, the name in Greek means the people before the moon.
Oh, very interesting. Before the moon. What could that mean? That could be before. Well, some cultures talk about many moons in the past. There might have been
about no moons.
Yeah, that's a bit odd. Before the moon. The moon is associated with disaster, catastrophe, comets. Not sure what to make of that.
Yeah,
well, there's also the legend of the Zulus of Africa, who say that they were around and they watched the moon. They were here before the moon, and they speak of a time before when we had no moon.
That is very interesting. And I actually do wonder if planets can switch positions, because I think we sort of agree that there's a lot behind the electric universe explanation of what's going on. And if we are really following the electric universe, we should look at what happens in an atom. And in an atom, electrons can suddenly flip orbits, flip orbitals. One electron, if you give that system energy, one electron will shoot far away from the atom and then rebound. When it rebounds, that atom will emit light of the same energy which that electron just discharged by returning to its orbit. And I'm wondering if planets can do this, if planets can spontaneously flip. I think this would be consistent with electric universe. So did the moon flip from somewhere else? Did it used to be something else? And the reason I bring this up is planets seem to have formed in pairs. That's what a recent article has said. So I think it was a NASA article, and they say suns form in pairs. Now, planets would form in pairs as well. Uranus, Neptune, Saturn, Jupiter, Earth, Venus. But then you look at Mercury and Mars. Surely they must have formed together if this rule holds. And then you have to ask, why aren't Mercury and Mars together in the solar system? Has something rearranged? And this is precisely the sort of stuff Velikovsky was talking about. He said, I think he said Venus, it might have been a moon. I think he said it popped out, physically out of Saturn, but also it could have well been a moon of Saturn. You know, the fact is we don't know what happened. We don't know what's going on, but we do know that conventional cosmology does not have the answers, and it's not satisfying enough for many people, which is why people are going into Electric Universe.
Well, I've seen the Electric Universe documentary, and I have to say I probably agree with about 99% of what's presented there. Astounding observations made in that documentary.
Well, absolutely. Absolutely. And the thing about Electric Universe, it has people from many fields in it. Experts of many fields have entered Electric Universe because it just makes so much sense. It makes sense like nothing else makes sense. You look at cosmology, the fact is unless you are obsessed with mathematics since you're a baby, you will not work out. No one will work out what cosmology is, how it works. But Electric Universe, you can verify it in a laboratory. And this empirical side of it is going to do wonders for it as a science. It's going to grow like crazy. And I think people are going to forget about some of the stuff that Stephen Hawking is saying in about 10 years.
Okay, well, I found, let me just do this real quick before we get too far off topic. I found a video. I'm not going to play the whole thing. I just want to, screen sharing failed to start. No session to start screencast. It's not going to let me screen share. Retry. Ian, you might have to do this because Google I'm in the naughty box right now. It's
they're not letting us put on any copyrighted content, eh?
This isn't copyrighted. This is somebody's video on it's John Hutchison. Thank you, by the way.
So it could be copyrighted.
Well,
yeah.
I mean, it's just not letting me do a screen share at all.
Yeah.
It doesn't even know what I'm trying to screen share. Here, I'll tell you what I'll do is I'll open this and I'll drop the link, and either you can try to share it, or maybe Charles can just watch it on his own, or maybe Charles can share it. I don't know. But right now, it's not letting me screen share. So I'm grabbing the link right now. Give me 1 second.
Charles, I've also dropped some links in our private chat here in the Google Hangout window.
All right, so there's a link. There's a link. It's a short video. It's only 3 minutes. Ian, why don't you see if you can share that real quick before we move on? And
I don't have any sound, though.
That's okay. We don't need sound.
Okay.
We're just looking for. I just want to show the visual effects of whatever because they don't explain. They never do. They don't tell you exactly what he's doing. All you know is he's got a garage full of electronic equipment, and he tweaks and he tunes and he turns a bunch of knobs, and he gets all these different vibrations and frequencies out of whatever he's doing. So there's really no need to hear anything really, because you're not going to learn anything except for what you see. And by the way, this is old stuff. This is like in the 70s and 80s. So what you're seeing is there's not going to be any Photoshop. There's no trickery. What you're seeing is what this guy was able to produce. So as soon as Ian is able to get that screen share going, Charles, I wanted to point out that there's a video of yours that I saw that I was pretty impressed with. I've not heard anybody mention this, talking about the Serapeum, that I really thought this was a good catch on your part. You said that there were new carvings on old coffin boxes.
That's correct. Actually, that's some of what the Kemet School is talking about, some of their tour guides on some of their videos, and this is rather interesting. It shows that things were being recycled through Egyptian history. So they found these old boxes with no writing. And this is what the Egyptians discovered when they found this. And they scrawled their writing all over it, and they were not used to a rock of this hardness.
And the precision is terrible.
Exactly, the precision is terrible. And that showed you that the people who did the scrawl, they didn't have the tools to manipulate that rock. So therefore it was not built by them, it was built by someone else earlier. So I mean, there you go. It just shows you that some of those sarcophagi, they were constructed by people who didn't use Egyptian writing or didn't carve it.
Ian, go ahead and play that video. Will it let you? You had it a minute ago. It's gone. I'm not seeing it. There it is. Okay, so this guy was using electromagnetism, sound frequencies, some sort of resonant frequencies. I think that's a piece of aluminum, which is not affected by electromagnetic fields, which is bouncing around on the table right there. In a moment, you'll see a bowling ball float into the air, a cup of liquid. The liquid comes out. The camera is not upside down, by the way. This is not a trickery. There's a copper penny, and looks like maybe a nickel or a dime on the table. There's some chunks of metal. And they start moving around.
It's amazing. It's almost like early life, you know, life stimulated electrically.
Well, here's the thing about this Hutchison effect, that all kinds of weird things start happening molecularly to this material. Like this started out as a solid chunk of metal, what you're looking at right there. And as you can see, it's pitted and pores, and it's broken, and that there are pieces that are missing. Skip ahead a little bit, Ian. And this saw just flies off of the...
Wow.
Now watch this. The whole cup of liquid just flies off the table. The wrench, a wooden bowl, a jar of paint.
Well, that's very interesting.
Watch this. Look at the paint coming out of that jar. Again, this is not upside down. This is not an upside down trick. I mean, it literally comes out of that jar completely and it flies up to the ceiling. And there's lots and lots of video of what this guy can do with this Hutchison effect. And his name is John Hutchison. It's no, and then eventually the whole jar flies off the table. You see the wrench is balancing on its head. The bowling ball is rotating, and the bowling ball flies away. The wrench flies away. And this wooden table is just balanced on some, you know, looks like some 5-gallon buckets. There goes the wrench. The bowling ball is trying to lift. In a moment, that bowling ball just shoots up. And I think that's a package of light bulbs.
It's extraordinary.
So somehow this guy was able to manipulate some sort of resonance between sound or electromagnetism. And again, he's literally affecting the molecular structure of giant chunks of metal where they just deteriorate and they come apart. It's almost like Tesla's, you know, death ray or energy weapon of some kind.
It's amazing. It's very Tesla-like. And what he's doing, I think it's still unknown to science or unacknowledged by science because, you know, they teach that all substances are magnetic, but only iron has a very strong magnetic field. Everything else has a very weak magnetic field that you can't really influence. And if he's playing with magnetism or something else, a resonance to distort the structure, like you say, this is something that they just don't teach in the universities.
Well, that goes back to what I was talking about earlier about how you can manipulate the physical state of the matter through sound, vibration, and electromagnetic frequencies.
Yeah, so we bring that up in relation to the polygonal structures of places like Sacsayhuaman and Ollantaytambo and places like that.
And I was going to mention to you as well, Charles, I watched on one of your videos, you showed how those stones were cut so precisely, like they were cutting butter, right?
Absolutely, absolutely.
And the only way you can get that to be able to cut that like butter is if you change the state of the matter itself so that you can cut through it precisely, like a laser.
Exactly. They
make it like it's into a loaf of bread. Take a brick and make it into a loaf of bread.
Exactly, and they look like loaves of bread as well, which is fascinating. I think that means it's alchemical or something, but it's absolutely extraordinary. And this Hutchison effect,
technology they've kept from us. The Freemasons had this craft as well. The first Master Mason died because he kept this knowledge, and there was 3 other Masons that wanted to know the secrets, and he wouldn't let them, and they tried to kill him to get the secrets.
Yeah, that's the Hiram Abiff ceremony that every Mason goes through. Right,
and they've kept this knowledge from us forever because they want to keep control over us that way. So that's just my...
It's amazing, you know, because the old Arab legends talk about Egyptian stones, the stones of the Great Pyramid, sort of flying on magic carpets. And what would happen is a man would walk up to the stone, he'd tap it with a stick, and then the stone would fly off into position. And I think either that means he's tapping it and the crane operator lifts it up, or it's something like this, because they would have had this technology for sure. If they had their Vimanas flying to other planets, as is mentioned in the Indian texts, they would have had this, and they would have used this.
Right.
All right, Ian, I'm going to drop you another link because I want to show this image while we talk about it, because since we're on the subject of changing the molecular structure, the possibility of using geopolymers, and also in relation to what we know to be quarried stone of enormous magnitude. Here's the link, if you would please share that, referring to the unfinished obelisk in Egypt, which is estimated at what, 1,300 or 1,600 tons, something like that. 1,200 tons. It's literally the biggest obelisk, and it never got finished. And as soon as Ian brings up the image, I want to point out that this thing, although it's being quarried, that it's because there are obvious scallops and what look like scoop marks. It looks like they were able to soften the stone. There you go. Hang on. Right there. Look like they were able to soften the stone and literally come in with a wooden tool and scoop it away as though it were soft clay.
Push it down through it like it's, yeah, like it's putty.
Those scallop marks to me are not the marks of a pounding stone. And again, as a contractor who understands all various types of construction and lots of different materials, the high points on those scallop marks are a target for anyone with a pounding stone. So to me, there's absolutely no logic in having those scallop marks whatsoever, unless, as I say, they were able to soften the stone and literally scoop out what they didn't want.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. And with your experience, you know this. That's exactly what it looks like.
And like I said, if you were a guy and your job was to sit on your knees with a dolomite pounding stone, an obvious target is any high spot. That's an easy prey. You know what I mean? It's easy to remove a high spot with a pounding stone. So there's no logic to me whatsoever in using any sort of pounding stone or chisel for that matter, because again, high spots are targets. If you're trying to chisel away and pound away material to shape something, any of those high spots where those scallops, you know, they're peaks and valleys, every one of those peaks is a target for a pounding stone.
Well, absolutely. And this is one of the things that they never talk about. They never want to talk about this because they don't have, look, this is the armchair academic problem. And Thor Heyerdahl talked about this. He actually, you're familiar with Thor Heyerdahl. He sailed off on the ocean and he questioned the academic perception that ships had to hug the land. And he said, no, you don't want to be near the land in a ship because there's huge waves. You want to be out in the ocean where it's nice and calm. And so all primitive ships, boating, they would have been pushed out into the ocean because if you're near rocks and everything, you're going to die. You have to be out in the open. It's much safer. And he said the armchair academics just don't understand because they don't have the practical experience. And it's the same with this. Everyone who is commenting, all the specialists who are commenting this, say that they're geologists. A geologist doesn't know what you know about construction. A geologist can only identify rock and find minerals. That's his job. And it goes on with every science. And it's actually a chemist, Joseph Davidovits, and he's an inorganic chemist, and he invented this geopolymer thing. And I think he's absolutely right in many ways because you see for yourself, there's scoop marks.
Ian, I'm going to drop you yet another link. This is from Dominic, my friend who lives in the UK, who I was chatting with him on Skype today. And he was telling me about the tar steps in Devon, England. Are you familiar?
I haven't heard of those, no.
There we go. Thank you, Ian. For some reason, it's not letting me do any screen share of any kind. So this is a location in England. They're known as the Tar Steps, T-A-R-R steps. It's the Tar Step Bridge. It's located in the county of Devon, England. This is also known as Devil's Bridge. It's on I don't know how deep into the esoteric you have gone in your in your research, but this is located on the River Baal. Now, a lot of us who research the esoteric and the Freemasons and the mystery schools and all that sort of thing will recognize Baal, B-A-A-L, B-A-A-L, Baal, as one of the ancient Hebrew gods. But this is spelled B-A-R-L-E, and I don't know if it's because of the English accent, but nevertheless, it's pronounced Baal on the River Baal. It joins the River Exe. It runs into Exeter. And the location is, I think it's the town of Exmoor. So there's like a triple X involved in this particular.
Interesting.
Wow. It's all relics of ancient maps, ancient map making. It's amazing. The Baal, especially the current generation of experts are unwilling to admit words like Baal have actually entered the language, but of course they did, because Phoenicians had huge trading links with Britain, so Baal would have been worshipped in Britain. And you even look at Belfast, Baal fast. I think it means Baal's fastness or fortress. And there is actually a huge fortress on a hill there, a Stone Age sort of thing. And it's just amazing that the experts say it means where the waters of the estuary flow. And to me, that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I think it was a fortress in ancient times. And yes, you see Baal all over the place. You see it in Ireland. You see it in UK. And those steps, did you say they were made of, why are they called tar steps?
I don't know why they're called tar steps. They are also known as the Devil's Bridge. It's in a location that's literally in the middle of nowhere. There's nothing anywhere near this site. It's said to be something like 3,000 years old.
Well, that's very interesting, because if there is nothing located there, it must be far older than 3,000 years old, or there would be a village, because you even have villages near Amesbury, near Stonehenge, which is a couple kilometers away.
Oh, Aaron, speaking of esoteric, guess that it covers 33 hectares of the River Bar Valley. Here, I'll screen share this.
These numbers like this were quite popular in ancient times. It's quite interesting, and they were popular because I think they were popular because they popped up in nature, and they somehow seemingly pop up at random, and people just do this even unwittingly. It's like a meta form of pattern arcing itself over the landscape through space and time. It's a type of reality that we can't see. It's bizarre.
Tar Steps Woodland National Nature Reserve. The river, the River Barl, which is my friend is English, and he pronounced it Baal, and I thought he was saying Baal as in Baal, and he had to spell it for me, and I don't know if it's because of the accent or just the way it's pronounced, but yeah, I mean, I picked up on that right away. But
there was certainly Baal worship. I recall reading a book about old Wales in the olden days, and they had a ceremony where they would pour a liquid on a pillar, and I think it was blood. And this is the same as the Phoenician Baal ceremony. There were so many traders.
Hold still, Ian. Go ahead. Please continue, Charles. I just want Ian to stay still right there. Don't move. Go ahead, Charles. Finish.
There were so many tin traders going to Cornwall, going to Devon, going to Wales, packed with tin mines. That's where they mined part of Stonehenge in the Presqu'île Hills. So yes, there were enormous trading contacts there. It's quite fascinating.
Okay, I just wanted to point this out because this is something that we talk about a lot, is numbers, esoteric meanings of numbers, things like that. Right here on this paragraph, center screen, it says the main car park and toilets from the bridge via footpath can be reached from the B3223. So you've got a 322, you've got a 22, you've got a 23. That number has got lots of esoteric meaning encoded within it. The B3223.
It's amazing, but it's amazing. You know, Pythagoras said that everything is numbers, and there's an underlying numerical
Charles,
reality.
Your audio cut out. Could you repeat, please?
Oh, sorry. Well, of course, it's Pythagoras who said that everything is numbers. Pythagoras must have been looking into this same sort of stuff, the esoteric numbers, and he noticed that certain numbers pop up in certain ways in the same way. Evil numbers pop up around evil objects, good numbers around good objects.
Right.
I think it's partly because the universe is stacked information. And this is what cosmology doesn't recognize. Everything is just matter, but it's actually information coding itself and creating objects all the time, creating new objects. The universe is a computer, but it's also a computer program, and it's rewriting itself all the time based on objects. And what we're seeing in these numbers is, I think it's in part the code expressing itself as numbers. And this is amazing. So, and it's amazing when we see synchronicities like this. it actually tells us about the place, as you say. So weird numbers, weird synchronicities, and it shows us what was going on at that place. If it's evil numbers, it's an evil place. Yeah.
Interesting. Cool.
Yeah, well, they say everything is mathematical and everything is electrical, so it all combines together. It's all,
Yeah.
it's all a big one equation, right? And whatever works out happens, right?
So among the list of things that I was reading off when we opened the show, when it came to similarities of all of these ancient cultures around the world, we have the elongated skulls, we have mummification, we have polygonal, earthquake-proof, megalithic construction, we have hieroglyphic writing, even in places like Peru and Easter Island, we have hieroglyphic writing. There's astronomical alignments to very, very precise alignment. There are also stone balls found all around the world, from LA, New Mexico, Bosnia, China, Italy, New Zealand, Costa Rica, Siberia. These stone balls are found. And on top of that, we also have these keystone cuts that help to keep large megalithic stones in place, where obviously a liquid metal was poured into the keystone cuts. I just think that the list goes on and on and on, from religion to culture to language to all the things that I just mentioned, that there was very, very clearly, at least to me, that there was in fact a worldwide civilization. It's not a diaspora, but literally a worldwide civilization.
You're absolutely right. There must have been a worldwide civilization, and the more people look into this, the more evidence you find. It's amazing. And as you say, with those balls, I don't know what they are. They could be fossilized ball bearings caught up in the catastrophe. They don't seem to be geodes. They certainly don't seem to be geodes. They seem to be, unless something is fossilized inside, but it's something that was technological, because why would you have that round shape? And I find that bizarre. I don't know if they're carved or if they're fossils. What do you guys think?
Those balls are a real head scratcher. And I have traveled to South Mexico in Middle America. I've been as far south as Palenque, which is right on the border of Guatemala. And I've seen the Olmec heads. I've seen the round stones. I've seen 3 different sacred pyramidal Mayan sites from Palenque, Chichen Itza, which is my icon, as you can see, and Teotihuacan. So I've been to all those places. I haven't the slightest idea. I've seen documentaries on these round balls, and like I said, I read off a list of where they're found. And it's not even a comprehensive list, but it covers the whole world at least. It's a real head scratcher, like you said. They could be anything. They really could be anything. Even ball bearings. I mean, they really could be ball bearings.
Yeah, there is a religious explanation. If we look at it as an egg, and often these balls are found around pyramids, because you've mentioned your travels, and also that stone ball was found next to the Bosnian pyramid as well. And I'm not sure if you're familiar with a ziggurat in Sardinia.
Yes.
And it's got an egg next to it. You see, it's got a rock shaped like an egg. And I think I might have said in one of my videos, this is the world's first Easter egg, because it associates the mathematics of astronomy of Easter with the pyramid. And of course, that's an auspicious time for agriculture. So if we look at the stone balls, is this replicating an ovum? Because it is perfectly round, and birds' eggs are not round. Did they have microscopes?
Human eggs are round.
Exactly.
A lot of eggs are round. Fish eggs are round. A lot of eggs in nature are perfectly round.
Exactly. I'm wondering, are these eggs, and is that why they're found next to pyramids? Because they're for a kind of ritual rebirth. So there is that.
Well, we do.
Are they?
Go ahead.
Yep. Are they early Easter eggs? And were Easter eggs round before?
Maybe so. I mean, yeah, there they are. Thank you, Ian. I can't do any kind of screen sharing. It just won't let me. It won't let me screencast at all right now. I'm in the naughty box. So yeah, we know that virtually every culture, through its some pagan nature, was very, very into worshiping and idolizing the fertility and the sexual nature of life itself, from summer to winter, from birth to death, of all, fertility of all kinds. Whether it meant it's time to grow crops, it's time to harvest the crops. Things are going to grow, things are going to die. So we know that fertility was a big, big part of ancient culture. They could be eggs. They could be. That's not a bad assessment, really.
Yeah, it is a problem, because all this was expunged in the old days. I think this religion, the pyramid religion, I think it's the same as the Babel religion, which was you build a tower to heaven. It has to be as tall as possible. That could also relate to an ancient super catastrophe, because it talks about all the world being one language in the same legend. So that reminds me of today, where we all speak English and everyone was scattered after that. But I do think that pyramids are the religion of Babel, and that would have been the fertility religion. It was the previous religion. And I've actually argued in my book that they're all worshipping the same deity. They're all worshipping. Do you know, if you go to Asia and you visit a stupa, these stupas, they're like pyramids, but they're sort of almost in an egg shape as well. They're hemispheres, but they are built for good luck. And I think they're built for Buddha, but this would have been Bud in the earlier incarnation. And Bud was, of course, the fat laughing man who is the Joker god. And of course, the Joker god is Satan, the devil, in later traditions. And I think this started a long time ago. This was Loki. This was, if you look at, inside the pyramid, there's a inscription to Khnum Khufu. And if you look at who Khnum is basically almost the same as the God of the Old Testament. There are pictures of him creating man out of mud, which is rather interesting. So there's something about fertility, something about rebirth going on about pyramids for sure. So eggs, it could be eggs.
Well, there's yet another connection with the bearded white man.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, the bearded white man is a very interesting god. Odin, he was almost, see, the Jesus legend is in a way a combination of gods, the pagan aspects of the Jesus legend. So we have the baby god, who is Jesus born, and in that way he is similar to Hercules, similar to the Tiwanaku baby sun god, because he's born as a sun god and there's an alignment between him and a star. So there's a star directly above the manger, which is interesting. Then he is a young man who is similar to Balder, a shining man full of wisdom, full of intelligence, similar to Buddha. And then he is, although he is not represented as an old man, he is represented as a young man, Balder, being killed by the mistletoe spear, or Longinus's spear. You have to look at the Odin legend of a guy hanging on a tree to get wisdom, and this is what the Book of Acts says. It says, I think it says Jesus was crucified on a tree or hanged from a tree, which is interesting. So this relates to the Odin legend, and so there is some Odin mixed in with Christianity. There had to have been. That's why it was so quickly adopted in Europe. Yeah, it's bizarre.
So, okay, let's move to something that I think is absolutely fascinating on your part. You have a video where you talk about Yonaguni.
Yep.
Where you compare Yonaguni with cholesterol crystals.
Yeah, and even an alkaline earth crystal. I think they're just so similar. And when I was looking at Yonaguni, I was okay, here's what happened. I was looking at Yonaguni and I was scratching my head and I was thinking, okay, I'm going to work out what this is. I'm going to work it out. And so I was looking at it and I actually had a dream, and in the dream, I think I was talking to some spirit which told me that this is mass production, quote unquote. So that was the subconscious working away, ticking away, and trying to express itself as best it could. So what's mass production? It's lots of little crystals working, and it looks like something you'd see under a microscope. It looks like a crystal. So I started looking at crystals. Cholesterol crystals have some of these hexagonal shapes for sure that you do see on Yonaguni, but even better are alkaline earth crystals. They look really like Yonaguni. And I was actually looking at the Baltic Sea anomaly the other day, and the Baltic Sea anomaly, for me, it has certain aspects of Yonaguni and also certain aspects of hexagonal crystalline quartz culture. Now, the Baltic Sea anomaly is described as round, but if you look at it, it's actually more hexagonal, and it does look crystalline to me. Even some of these Inca sort of shapes, these Inca quarries look like they could be huge crystals, but I think those are not. Those are actually the quarries.
I found, I've been studying these things as a hobby for, quite a long time. And I do notice that there is a striking similarity between some of the structures in Bolivia that are very similar to Yonaguni, in that they have these strange irregular steps, that they're not symmetrical. One step is taller than the other. They're not the same size. They're not the same height. And
Exactly.
I just saw a weird similarity between some of the sites in Bolivia and Yonaguni.
There definitely is, because you see a staircase, an inverted staircase going up diagonally. It's too small for human steps, and you think, what on earth was that? Were they carving out small bricks all in the same place to make a staircase? That doesn't make any sense. You can carve them out from wherever you want. It's so weird. Certainly there is a crystalline aspect of rocks. And I suggested in my video that Yonaguni is a huge crystal on a huge scale, and we're not used to seeing crystals like this. And that's why we can't explain it. And people in the comments said, well, a crystal is not a rock. That's a rock. It's different. But look, crystals are rocks, and rocks. a rock is a mixture of different types of crystals and other dirt and all sorts of things.
It's
exactly.
Rocks are crystalline structures in almost every form. So
exactly.
Do you recall the title of that video? Because I'd like to pull it up and highlight some of the things that you bring up in that video. It's great stuff.
I believe Yonaguni giant crystal. That would find it. But yeah, it's quite interesting. And those things you talk about in Bolivia, for sure, they have crystal aspects. They look a lot like Yonaguni. And yeah, you look at you look all over the island on Yonaguni. I believe it was Robert Schoch who went there, and he wasn't convinced about Yonaguni in the way Graham Hancock was convinced, because he actually said, well, you can see this sort of rock all over the island, and it's bizarre. And here's the thing, Yonaguni, it's not too far off the Marianas Trench, which is a little bit further north, but this is the Pacific Ring of Fire. So you would have a pure type of lava crystal coming out of the ocean floor, and it's not contaminated, you see. It's got no contaminants from the other rocks which have been on the Earth's surface for hundreds of millions of years. It's pure, it's in a pure form. And this is why I think it takes the crystal structure.
I think you're correct. I honestly do. And even though that's a really out there theory, I think you lay down a really strong case. And I have to say that I think you're correct. Now, Ian, he said he's going to be right back. He just left me a message in the chat there. If you would like to, Charles, there's a link. Can you see the chat box on the side of our hang?
I'm back. Do you want me to share it?
Yeah. Oh. Now, this is Charles's video, and either you or Charles feel free to share this. It's 18 minutes long. We don't have to play it, but you can skip through and find the places where he makes the comparisons to some of these crystals, especially the bismuth crystals, the cholesterol crystals. And I think you're really onto something. And it wouldn't surprise me one tiny little bit if something the size and scale of Yonaguni could in fact form on its own through crystallization. In fact, soon I'll be taking a trip to go to Wyoming to visit Devil's Tower. And Devil's Tower is understood to be the core column of a volcano. Now, it has this hexagonal structure within the hardened basalt or hardened lava or whatever it's made up of. And this hexagonal pattern is found many places around the world. There's one, I think, in Taiwan where they use the basalt pieces to build some huge city. I think it's in Taiwan. And then there's the Devil's Causeway in Ireland, which has this very similar, it's a volcanic hexagonal structures where the cracks, fissures form in a hexagonal pattern. And again, I believe that this has everything to do with Earth's own resonant, whether it be sound or magnetic or electric resonance that causes these hexagonal patterns to form in stone.
Totally correct. Totally agree. And with the Giant's Causeway that you mentioned, the ancient people thought that this was a bridge built by giants. It also shows, if it was a bridge to what? Because it's on the coast, so there must have been more land before. It just goes to, these legends sort of prove that the sinking of these continents in ancient times. And you have to look at those pyramids, such as the Bosnian pyramid. And I think that there's a terraced hill that looks like a pyramid, and it was overcome by a huge a landslide. But it was certainly artificial, and it was certainly treated as a pyramid. And it doesn't matter if it was natural or if it was built. To the ancient people, they still didn't know how it was built, and they still could have thought of it as a pyramid that was built by giant ancestors, as I'm sure they thought the Giza pyramids were built by possibly giant ancestors as well. And you look at some of those pyramids around the world, the Antarctic pyramids, you see a big crystal. And some of them, they're too big to have been built by man. They're even too big to have been built by giants. Some of them could be. Some of them could even be the fossilized pyramids, which have been, and this is the product after the disaster, they're actually encased in rock. And people, geologists come up, they look at the rock and they say, wow, that's got to be natural because I've checked the rock. But if you look underneath that, I mean, you look at the Bosnian pyramid, I think it was a stepped structure. Could have been carved out of the mountain. In the case of the Bosnian pyramid, I think it was a real pyramid or a stepped mountain because it's facing the town. And that's all you needed to do. But if you look behind the structure, it's less a pyramid. But it didn't have to look like a pyramid from that side. If you look at the famous photo, it's facing a town. So the people just had to say that there was a pyramid there, and it didn't matter what it looked like behind. I think it was a carved mountain or something. And it really was a type of pyramid. And, you know, the experts say it wasn't a pyramid, but if you look at, see, something they're not seeing, they're seeing the mudstone, and they're saying, well, this could all be natural, but they're not looking at the flush level, the level walkways around it. And these are perfect, these are in some cases perfectly level. And nature doesn't do that. Nature doesn't make level steps into a mountain and then lay a sort of level surface. You see, so they're looking at the rocks. I think it's another type of crystal that's covered up that mountain.
I think so too. Yeah. Ian, are you with us? I know you got yourself on mute right now, but I've got a couple. Okay.
I'm back.
Go ahead and share the purple. There's two links right there. Share the purple one. The most recent one right after you said be right back.
Do we need sound for this? Or?
No, it's his video. He can narrate it for us. But again, it's 18 minutes. We don't have to play the video. We can just skip through and find the places. Okay, there's Yonaguni. So I just wanted to, bring up some images for people that are not familiar with some of the sites that we're talking about here. This is the underwater site that's off of the coast of Okinawa, Japan. Is that correct?
I think so.
So Ian, just skip around a little bit, and Charles, if you know better where to find it, there you go.
I'll start talking. Yeah, so I was, this is the thing, I was looking at this, and I was thinking, my God, what's going on here? This is unbelievable. And I was trying to work out what sort of building is it? And the answer is it isn't any sort of building at all. It's not, it's a mess. It's just a mess of mathematics.
It's a hot mess. Absolutely.
It's a total mess. And you look at those, do you see that the loop road? Now that could be something artificial maybe, but if you look at the structure of Yonaguni itself, it is a total mess. It is not staircases and rooms. It is a mess, a total freaking mess. And so that's what got me thinking about that it must be a crystal, because it looks a lot like a crystal through a microscope. And again, you see, I think this is a comparison with, it could be something in Bolivia, something in Peru, and you see a lot of similarity. You see steps that they just don't do anything.
They're not steps. They're not regular at all.
Well, exactly.
Like I said,
exactly.
some are tall. You know, one step is much taller than the step next to it or above it, and some of them, the platforms are not the same. There's no uniformity whatsoever, so I wouldn't call them steps.
Well, exactly right. And even a previous civilization of supergenius giants have to use steps for a purpose that we can understand as their descendants. So I mean, that is bizarre, totally bizarre.
Well, anybody in history that's ever built steps, to my knowledge, there's a model of Yonaguni, so it gives you, the viewer, then a good idea of the overall structural shape. And there's no uniformity whatsoever. Everything is irregular. Everything about it is completely irregular. So, like I was going to say, every human being that I've ever known throughout history that makes a staircase makes them relatively uniform, because whoever walks up and down, it's comfortable. You make it comfortable for the people that use them, and it's very tall in one step, very short in one step, way tall, and it just makes no sense.
Well, that's the thing. It must have been generated by the mathematics of a crystal system. It must have erupted from the ocean floor in a pure form, and then it formed spontaneously. And here we're looking at something which was built by humans. This is in the Canary Islands. And this is actually controversial, because Tor Heyerdahl said these are pyramids which prove my theory of transatlantic contact, and the carbon dates from underneath show that they're 150 years old, built by farmers. I think they were renovated by farmers, messed up by farmers, and that's the cause of the carbon dating. But actually they're ancient. I've shown in another video they match equinoctial alignments, and farmers wouldn't bother around building ancient pyramids for equinoctial alignments 150 years ago. They were Christians. They went to church. They didn't have time for that. They were farmers, And here we have, so that was man-made, and this is what I guess is crystalline in nature. It is a giant crystal, and you just have to look at it to see. And people have tried to give these names, but names of rooms. But if you ask yourself, are you satisfied with these as rooms? And the answer has to be no. This does look like a type of crystal, triangular pool. Yeah. Yeah,
Ian, skip ahead, because he shows examples of cholesterol crystals. Go ahead, skip ahead a little more. Right about there. There's the beginning of where he talks about crystalline structures, and then he shows images of actual cholesterol and some bismuth and some other crystal structures that we know were crystals. Here we go.
That's cholesterol. And you can see for yourself how irregular it is. It forms in 3 dimensions. These are planar crystals which form in 3 dimensions, jutting out in different directions, and hence some of them are slightly out of focus. But you can see, and pay particular attention to the step-like structure.
There's terracing going on there.
Exactly, and some of the angles. And there's even tiny little steps appear, you see, just tiny little ones, just randomly. And just like Yonaguni, you can't interpret them as having any practical purpose.
Yeah, go ahead and skip a little bit more, Ian. Right there, there's another example.
I can't recall what type of crystals these are, but as you said, they could be more cholesterol crystals. If you look at the first one down the bottom, you will see a little step happening there, and it's terraced. It's like 2 levels of Yonaguni, and it's almost as if a bit of a staircase is trying to form. If there was more crystallization happening right there, that crystal step would encourage the growth of another crystal step next to it due to the similarity of the atoms. atoms crystallize based on the atoms around them. So that would trigger the formation of more steps around it. And you see that happening here in this crystal here. I think this now we've got to what I think it is, the alkaline earth crystal. And this is the bismuth stuff you were mentioning. And as you see, you have a complicated mathematical structure which looks like the top of Yonaguni.
Yeah. Again, there's terracing and there's odd, irregular shapes.
Absolutely.
I
And
think you're right. It's a giant crystal.
yeah, and absolutely. And look, if you look at the edges of this crystal, you see that the sharp angles. You see there's a bit of a drop off. And it's like you see at Yonaguni, it's a raised platform, and all this is a structure on top of a raised platform, just like at Yonaguni.
Go ahead, Ian. Skip a little bit.
Again, I think these are cholesterol crystals again, but you can see exactly what's going on, and you can see there were right angles in those crystals, right angles,
Sure.
and people say, well, there's no right angles in nature, but
That's not true at all.
There you go. Exactly. And now we see very much like what we saw with the alkaline earth crystal. We see a raised platform, and on top of the platform is a hideous math of mathematics. And that's just to try and interpret. I was going nuts just trying to work out what this could have been for if this was human. And the answer is there is no answer if you're thinking about it like that. I mean, yeah. And again, this is the thing, crystal. And look at A. Oh, do you see there? It's right there.
There it is.
Right there, A. And that is basically a small Yonaguni
Exactly.
in action.
That's what, after I watched this video, I got to tell you, I was sold on this idea. I think you're really onto something here.
I think you've nailed this.
Nice, awesome. Yeah, it's good to hear
Or else,
that.
or else they made this structure to represent what that looked like, right? The crystal.
Well,
Could be, but complicated to do.
exactly. Could be, but complicated to do. It's not impossible, but not very probable.
Right.
Well, the thing is, we don't know quite how old it is. There is a Japanese professor who says this is actually man-made, and he bases this on the fact that it was above sea level 8,000 years ago, and that got me thinking, what's it for? Yeah, look, it could have been a fortress or something, some sort of fortification used by men, but not necessarily made by men. And here's the trench. So I think this was a type of volcanic rock, but a sort of pure rock, a rock in pure crystalline form, which pops out. What I mean is a pure form of crystal. So a rock is a mixture of different formulas of crystals. That's why rocks are kind of messy, because they're crystals going in different directions with different formulas and different types of crystals in the same rock. Here, what we see is one type of crystal making up most of the rock. And you see these volcanic trenches, and where you see where Yonaguni is, it's in this volcanic zone. This is an earthquake volcanic zone, and I want you to actually look at the shape of the trench. Do you see the dark trench?
Yep.
And if you look off the coast of Taiwan, you'll see a right angle in the trench. The entire trench, just right around where the mouse is, where it was a second ago, right there. It's just amazing. You see mathematics in that whole trench. So that whole trench is made up of this type of rock, which is similar to Yonaguni. And it is trying to form mathematics, but it's not as pure as the crystal at Yonaguni. So it's going off in various tangents, and it's a mixture of different types of crystals. But right there, you see a nice right angle, and they say that doesn't form in nature. But there you go.
And more terracing on a larger scale.
Exactly, huge scale terracing. And I think, even the geologists really, they said it was natural, but they couldn't really explain it, because the fact is science, history isn't that advanced. It really isn't. And there are so many inroads for people to make discoveries and to find things out just by applying what they already know to what they think is a specialized field. But
I think what we're lacking is a cross-pollination in fields.
Exactly. There are too many, and you look at that. I put that photo in there to show that crystals can form on a large scale.
Oh, and by the way, hold still, Ian. You did say something in this video that I think is incorrect. about the reason that man is wearing the suit. It has nothing to do with the air or any particulate matter in the air that he's afraid to breathe. The issue with this particular cave system is that it's so far down that the temperature is very, very high, and they have to wear these suits that help keep them cool so that they can explore the cave long enough, because it's something like 150 degrees inside this cave system. And without some sort of cooling protection, a human being couldn't last but a minute or two inside that space.
Awesome, and yeah, that explains it.
So I just wanted to correct you on that, because I did watch this video and I thought your assessment on Yonaguni was fascinating. But when you said something about why he was wearing the suit, I think you said it because there was particulates in the air or something. But I just want to let you know that it's because of the temperature.
Awesome.
So there's bismuth. There's bismuth crystals that look, square. You've got square angles. You've got right angles. You've got terracing.
Well, exactly, and this is what you see at Yonaguni. If you look at the right of this picture, some of that crystal which is illuminated, you see stuff that almost looks Mayan. I'm wondering if they were drawing crystals as well. It's a bit bizarre. You see hooks.
Oh yeah, I do see.
Strange knobs and things popping out, and this is the mathematics of crystalline patterns. So, and here's the thing. We were talking about some of that rock in Bolivia, etc., as once being soft. And that's, if it was soft, through resonance, it can then acquire a certain shape. Whether that shape is acquired because that's the fundamental molecular shape, or because that's the shape created by the resonance, it sort of shows that rock in Bolivia was soft at one time. And it's lying there. Some of those quarries, they're lying there next to those other huge rocks. So you have to wonder, well, were those soft as well? Were those walls also soft? And was it formed at the same time?
This is some other crystal. I don't know which.
Yeah, I'm not sure too. It could be more alkaline earth crystal, or it. Yeah, or it could be some bismuth. I'm not sure, but there you go. You look at that, and that's what you see at Yonaguni. You see exactly that, because you see a diagonal sort of step next to a flat plane and perfect right angles.
With a perfect right angle and what looks like a perfect 45-degree angle on the right corner of the screen there.
Absolutely, the mathematics of nature, and yeah. So I hope now people will pick up, and you see. Look at this again. This is a nice right. I think this could be sodium chloride. That's what it looks like, and we know they have a square crystal, and that's what the overall structure forms. And yeah, nature is good at this, but it can't do it on a large scale because of contamination. So what happened at Yonaguni must have happened very quickly before contaminants could get in and disrupt the crystal shape.
Here's a really good example.
And yeah, absolutely. I think this is another alkaline earth crystal. And if you look at the top, you see a sort of platform with a couple knobs or rooms, you could call them, I suppose, on top. And so this is extremely Yonaguni-like.
All right, hold still, Ian. The only thing I wanted to point out here is the remarkable pyramidal shape in Exhibit B on this image. What a perfect pyramid that's formed right there.
It's amazing. And we look at the formula. It's got a bit of aluminum, I think, and silicon, calcium silicon. This is a sort of silicate. Yeah, this is a sort of thing that could form natural pyramids as crystals, such as possibly the Bosnian pyramid. But that was definitely part man-made for sure. But you see a lot of natural pyramids, and there's no way they could have been built by man, especially in Antarctica, unless it was a very long time ago. And of course, they would have been crystals. And yeah, geologists don't say this. Geologists don't say, "Oh, that's a crystal," because they just say, "Yeah, it's a rock." You know, everything's a rock. You know, so yeah.
No, but again, rocks are crystals.
Oh, that's the thing. You're right. Yeah, that's the thing.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, they have metallic properties, whether they're minute or not. They're still there.
And this is what popped up while the video was ending, because the camera battery ran out. And I was saying what you were saying, Aaron. I was saying, what are these steps doing here? They don't do anything. And you look where they lead. They lead into a solid face, which does nothing. And you see this sort of rock all over the Peruvian landscape, and it's just bizarre. You see inverted steps going nowhere, going into just a flat piece of stone, and you wonder what's going on. People like Brian Forster have actually said that there's something like you're supposed to meditate there, go into different dimensions. I don't know. They could have a spiritual purpose, but at the end of the day, you look at how they were formed. They could have all been formed naturally, or a lot of them have been formed naturally, and the ones that aren't formed naturally are human built, but an imitation. They're trying to make them as nature has formed them elsewhere in the same landscape. So they're trying to replicate nature for whatever reason.
Okay. Thank you, Ian. I was going to tell you to go ahead and pop that one up. This is Lalibela in Ethiopia. Now, these churches were carved literally right out of the bedrock. So we've discussed geopolymers, and we really haven't had time to really get into the geopolymers, and we're running down maybe about 35 minutes left. And by the way, we can do overtime if you would like.
I don't mind.
But this is not geopolymer. This is clearly carved out of the bedrock. So what do you know about Lalibela?
Not much, but I think it was carved. It was carved, or it was built. It's certainly not like it's certainly not in the same sort of category as Yonaguni. Here in this photo here, it's interesting. If you look closely, you can see layers in the cross section. There is layering, and there is green moss growing out of the layers. There must be water attracted there, and I think this over there's sedimentary layers. Or it was carved. It was a huge quarry, like the Sphinx.
Yeah.
Well, the local legend, as far as I know, in Lalibela, the legend of the people say that that the angels or dwarves or some sort of gnome or something would show up in the middle of the night and do the work. That they'd see lights. And the ancient legend on how this was created was that something, typically they're referred to as angels, would show up and do all the work. And like I said, they saw lights.
Okay, what I think is going on there, that is very similar to the crop circle legends, where lights pop up and then crop circles appear. I think what is going on there is these crop circles pop up near Avebury, near Stonehenge. And why is Stonehenge and Avebury there? They're there because of these earth lights being created. I think it was Paul Devereaux wrote a book called Earth Lights, and he said lots of these lights pop up on fault lines where there are faults, and because of this, ancient people thought, oh, these lights are popping up. We have to build a shrine there. We have to build a church there. We have to build something there, because these are holy lights. These are spirits trying to communicate, trying to come through. And that's how that legend could have evolved, that there were these spirits there. As for the legend of a previous type or a different type of intelligence doing the building, that's very interesting, because it shows it's a different, like in Egypt, it's a different civilization that did the carving. And to me, that is so similar to the Sphinx, which also was, the body at least, was carved out of rock. It is the bedrock. And they decided to carve an animal, or if it is an animal, out of the bedrock. And here they've decided to carve a cross. And it's I'm wondering, is that cross actually a newer carving? Could it have been something else before and they've modified? But I don't know. That's just a speculation.
Okay, now I'm going to go a little bit out on the fringe here. Have you ever heard of the Blair Cuspids?
It sounds like a type of star. I don't know what that is.
I just dropped a link, another one for Ian to share, because I'm in the penalty box. The Blair cuspids are obelisks that have been photographed on the moon.
Uh-huh.
Now, I'm going to try to find this other link while we're talking, but you did mention earlier if I was familiar with ziggurats, and I am familiar with ziggurats. In fact, a ziggurat was photographed on Mars.
It may have been, yes.
Somewhere,
This is...
if I can find it somewhere, I know that there's a photograph of a ziggurat on Mars, but go ahead, please.
I think that if these are real, these were done by the previous civilization as a marker. So I think we're talking 120,000 years ago to 60,000 years ago. I'm ending it at the Toba eruption.
Go back one, Ian. Go back one image.
I think, yeah, this is amazing. This is
look at number 4 on the left of the screen. Can you make that any bigger, Ian? Can you expand that a little bit? Look at the shadow on the number 4. Right there. Look at how long that shadow is. Whatever that is, it's very tall.
Wow. Yeah. So either that is the center of, you know how there's a peak at the center of each crater. Either it's one of those as part of a huge crater, or it would be artificial, or could it be a type of stalagmite, do you think? But if so, what would form it? It's formed by something dripping. I mean, that evidence of the shadow points to it, to me, as being artificial.
Yeah, number 5 seems to have a tremendous shadow. However, I think there might be some landscaping which is probably helping that shadow to appear longer than it might really be. Nevertheless, number 5 appears to be the largest in size overall, just the white spot. It might very well be that tall. But go ahead, Ian, you can skip through some pictures there.
I like to look for synchronicities in fiction to actually prove synchronicities, to actually prove the truth in reality, because I think it's all from the same source. It's all the source of the universe, the stacked information feeding us information. So we look at Arthur C. Clarke's work, Obelisks on Foreign Planets. Was he channeling something from reality? Did he get that from reality? I've got a theory that there is no imagination. We're getting everything from reality. So in a way, this is very interesting, because if you were an ancient civilization, look how ancient civilizations in the Stone Age, look at the Hammurabi column, the steelers in India. This is how ancient civilizations marked their territory with an obelisk. So was that a memory of when a previous super civilization was staking out its claim on the moon and saying, okay, this part of the moon is ours, the boundary stealers, and this part of the moon can be yours. This can belong. This part of Atlantis. This part of the moon belongs to Proto-Atlantis. This part of the moon belongs to Proto-Lemuria, etc. Something like that. It could well be, because if we're talking, as we are, about a super civilization, something which is just beyond our comprehension, then all of this is fair game. And all of this could be true. And we have to actually expect this. We have to expect them to have exhibited human-like behaviors.
Okay, let me ask you this question. Are you familiar with, let me see, I'm sorry, I'm talking and I'm typing and I'm searching at the same time here. There's a story of an obelisk that is in the water of Lake Ontario. Now,
I've heard of this.
Now, it's in 200 feet of water. Okay, so this is one hell of a tall obelisk. And the story is that it used to stick up above the water, and up until recently, within the last 80 or so years, 50, 60, 80 years, not really that long ago, people used to row their boats out. It wasn't very far offshore, but it was in 200 feet of water. People used to row their boats out, tie off, have lunch for the day. You could literally see it and touch the very top of the obelisk as it poked out of the water. The water was clear, and when you got up to it, you could see down and see that it was a square obelisk. Apparently, a storm came through, and the thing fell over at some point in the late 1900s. Like I said, people would row their boats out and tie off. A storm came through.
It's very interesting. That's
I don't know.
That relates. It relates a bit to ancient Egypt because the Giza Plateau could have been pyramids, which are similar to obelisks, I suppose, in the middle of a huge lake, because the Nile would have surrounded, in ancient times, it did surround the Giza Plateau. And you might have had to row out to the Giza Plateau in inundation season. And there's other lost pyramids which were in the middle of Lake Moeris in Egypt. So I'm wondering, this is rather interesting, but to be at the bottom of a lake, did you say it's a 200-foot lake?
It's 200 feet of water. It's Lake Ontario.
See, to have done something like that, either it's so long ago that it wasn't a lake,
Right.
or the technology was such that they could just build it and in a similar environment to how it looks today.
Well, I can't imagine the purpose of putting one in an actual lake.
Yeah, I'm thinking of some visual effect, but the problem was the lake would have to be a bit shallower, I suppose. Otherwise, there's no point looking at it, is there?
Exactly. I mean, what other function would it have? Anyway, I don't know.
I wonder if that obelisk had a type of writing on it. And this is speculating, but it's a message for the future. So it's something to be revealed when a civilization appears which has the technology to drain that lake and read the writing, or to dive and to have a look to see if there is actually anything written on it. Because I think that might be the next step to examining that obelisk. That if someone can actually get, I know it's collapsed, but if someone can get down there, that would be interesting. If someone can really examine that, and also to see what sort of stone it is, to see if it's made of andesite or granite, the type of possibly artificial stone that we see in Peru and in Egypt. That would be amazing as well.
So Ian, see if you can pull up that picture that I just dropped there. And I'm going to try to find a better one. I know that there's a better one somewhere. And I can't remember where I learned about this ziggurat on Mars. But pretty remarkable stuff. Anyway, we know about Cydonia. We know that there was pyramids on Mars. We're pretty sure that there were civilizations on Mars. Let me see if I can do this other search for something else. It's
a pyramid would be perfect for Mars, because you know how they say the Giza pyramid was it's blast proof. It could withstand a nuclear explosion because of the shape. It just deflects everything. So you would have a lot of blasts on Mars, just natural meteorites falling down, asteroids, because there isn't much atmosphere to burn them up. And so you would want to build something shaped like a pyramid as a sort of habitation, I think.
Okay, right now I'm searching for a particular image. It's Apollo S38-5564. We did not find any results. Maybe I didn't type it in correct. It's AS11. Sorry, let me try this again. AS11. 38-564. There it is. I think that's it. It's not showing what I wanted it to show. Oh, actually, you know what? This is on the moon. I'm mistaken. It's not on Mars. There's a ziggurat on the moon.
Oh, wow.
And it's Apollo 11 frame AS11-38-5564. I just want to say that out loud for the record. I'm not able to pull it up specifically. Maybe I'm not typing it exactly properly. Maybe it's my capital sensitive. Maybe my dashes are in the wrong place. I don't know. See, when I correct for capitals, I get a whole different. Oh, there it is. Hell yeah. Oop, let me get this up. Let me get this other one. This is actually a better picture. All right. This is really, really interesting here. I'm going to show you this. enter. Okay, Ian, drop that. Ian, pull that one up and let's see that. Now, one more time. This is the Apollo 11. It's the frame number is AS 11-38-5564.
Wow.
Yeah,
That's bizarre.
I know, right? That's on the damn moon.
That's bizarre. Well, either it's a crystal or a lost civilization. That's amazing. Yeah, that's yeah.
Oh, wait a minute. Maybe I just got my notes a little bit too crammed together. Maybe this is Mars because it says near Daedalus crater on my note here. And maybe that is Mars. It's just a black and white photo.
I think this designation of photos with the A refers to Mars usually. And that sort of proves it, the Hoagland. Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah, so I mean, if that's not a ziggurat, I don't know what is. That's a ziggurat on the moon or on Mars or wherever it is. Barra Hoagland. Okay, so that's Mike Barra and Richard Hoagland. Okay.
That's amazing. And that's it's
yeah, pretty amazing stuff there.
I guess they must have stretched out the shadow to give it that 3D look. That's amazing. That's there's something square buried under the sand, and that in itself is suspicious. Yeah, that's amazing. It's almost got pillars like horns on each corner, which is even more interesting because this is how ancient Israelite temples were built. There was sort of on the top of each corner, on the roof, there was sort of almost like a horn, like an obelisk, and this sort of shows that. And why would you? And I don't know any representation of a ziggurat which shows such things. So I think at least there's something going on here. There's something going on that can be investigated. That's interesting. Yeah, that's bizarre. That's interesting. Yeah, and it's actually amazing how much can be revealed when you play around with the images and change the light and everything, and it's amazing.
So I'm guessing you're familiar with Hoagland's work and Barra's work. Do you have opinions on the Cydonia location on Mars?
The Cydonia, that's tricky. That's tricky because, you know, I'm sure everyone had their hopes up. I think was it 1998 when NASA finally revealed the picture, and I remember I just came home, couldn't wait to see what it looked like, and I saw, well, it looks like a mesa, and there's lots of mesas on Earth that look just like that photo, the updated photo. Then again, why did people think it was a face in the first place? I think we have to look at that. So I think that, again, there's something going on. There's something weird about the site. The site has a lot of mesas on it. Some of them could be natural crystals of a pyramid shape, or they could be artificial. Here's the thing. If we had ancient super technology, and we did, that's proven in the ancient Indian text, that's proven. We must have had some kind of colony on Mars and some kind of colony on the moon. So we can start looking at these shapes, and we have to, I suppose, decide whether or not they belong to those former colonies, whether they are a permanent relic of those colonies, whether something was built there. I think it's difficult to build something enduring somewhere like Mars, where I suppose the sand can cover it over and everything can change. They have some wild weather there. I used to look at Mars through the telescope, and sometimes you can't see the features because there is a violent dust storm going on. Now, I just don't know. I mean, look, it could have happened. If there were colonies, they might have been a bit too fragile to have survived. But then again, we could be talking about something super ancient, something from 1 million years ago, 2 million years ago.
Right.
And yeah, it might have been pre-human. It might have been a different type of human, because of course we know there are footprints going back hundreds of millions of years in coal, which the geologists won't talk about. The last time it was spoken about in an academic journal was in 1940 in Scientific American. They called it the Carboniferous Mystery. And because people aren't talking about it, we're not going to, no one's finding this out. So we're not going to know for sure. But I think the chance of colonies on the moon and Mars stemming from Earth in deeply ancient times is 100%.
We were lucky enough to have Michael Cremo on here a couple of months ago. And I've read his book, Forbidden Archaeologist. And so I'm quite familiar with the coal deposits that have human skeletons, artifacts, and tools of modern Homo sapien skeletal structure that are buried and discovered in coal deposits that are 300 million years old.
Well, that's absolutely amazing, and it's absolutely true as well. So here's the thing: either we don't know how to measure geological time, and these are recent humans, even the human giants of the Bible, in which case they were overcome in a catastrophe, because coal has to form all at once or it's going to be eroded, burned off by bushfires, etc.
So
we have to ask... Yep.
Yeah, go ahead, please finish.
So we have to ask what's going on. Is the geology wrong? And if the geology is wrong, that these are hundreds of millions of years old footprints, that means everything about geology is wrong. Every dating, every assumption of what a type of stone is wrong. So we can't trust geologists to say what anything is.
No doubt.
You see?
Yeah.
Or they really are, or they really were humans back then. And both are fascinating possibilities.
So did you have a slideshow or some presentation? Did you put anything together? I'd love to turn it over to you. And like I said, I'm happy to go overtime as long as you need.
Okay. I can begin with a Leyline's presentation, because I want to get into something that you were talking about. You talked about all these ancient sites being stretched along a sort of equator. And I found that a bit fascinating. I'm going to bring up this guy. Let's see if it works.
Yeah, that was in a documentary, and
Can you see that?
Yeah, hang on 1 second. I'm sorry. Yep, I got you. Sorry. I got you. Go ahead. I just wanted to name that documentary for reference, but go ahead. Yep.
And I think these are ancient superhighways. You see, they're ancient superhighways. I'm not sure about that equator one, because I haven't seen it. But they're ancient superhighways, and they're created by a race which is more advanced than ours, and they themselves inherited a world, and they carved it up as efficiently as they could. And I'll just get to that. This is Alfred Watkins. He was an absolute genius, an Englishman, a photographer. He ran a brewery, different businesses. And one day, while taking photographs of the landscape, he had an utter revelation. He saw ley lines, and let's get into what he saw. He also designed this, by the way. This is an exposure meter. So this guy was no imbecile. He knew what he was doing. And it's also been, this is discovered by, co-discovered by John Mitchell in later times, because he found this guy's book and brought new fame to it. So you can even see in the cover, you follow a church to this, to that, eventually to a pyramid. It's one huge straight highway across the landscape. And people talk about energies, but I'm just curious as to what they really are. That's Watkins' book from the 30s. That's a newer one. And ley lines was something like this. This is a beautiful place. You might not have seen it. This is from Poland. This is the Kościuszko mound from Krakow. And this is how ancient it's built in the same way as ancient pyramids. Just briefly, they brought soil from the battlefields. This was a Polish general who defeated a Russian army with a half peasant army, so that's why he was a hero. And they brought soil from battlefields to build this. Now, there's a legend about the Bosnian pyramid. They brought soil from around different places and heaped it on the Bosnian pyramid. They did the same thing with the American pyramids. They did the same thing in Ireland with different mounds. That's the ancient legend. They've analyzed the soil. So we're talking about, this is how pyramids are formed. But anyway, how a ley line would work is you would want to get as high as possible to look above the ancient forest, because 5,000 years ago, most of Europe was a forest, and this was the pre-road system. This is what Alfred Watkins said it was. And he was vilified for saying this by archaeologists, because archaeologists didn't have the tools to interpret or decide on what he was, they couldn't test it, because what he's doing is geography, it's not archaeology. Anyway,
Right.
when I was...
a lack of
Exactly.
a lack of cross-pollination of
a lack of
studies.
Exactly. And I sort of saw for myself what ley lines were when I was in Poland, because I got on some of these ancient mounds, and it's just amazing. When you're on top of a mound, you can see other mounds on the horizon, and that's how you know where to go. In ancient times, that's how you look above the forest. You get on top of a hill, and you look for another hill, and then you get back down into the forest, and you try and keep to the same direction until you get to the next hill. And then you go up the hill, and that's what a ley line is in its purest form. And so this is a map of a ley line, and it shows you the fact that a church was there shows you that it was on the side of an ancient road, which doesn't exist anymore. And here we have another mound. They were on the roadsides as a religious object. So there might have been a road going right next to Stonehenge as well, which was on a ley line. And you see this everywhere. And here's the thing. There is a line which goes through England called the St. Michael's Line. It goes from there down to there. And there's a legend of more land being here, Lyonesse. And you have to ask what happens there. That line actually is on the easternmost point of England. The easternmost point. And it cuts right through the middle. Right through the middle here. And I think it's ancient land. It actually crosses Helsinki. These are lines which go across the earth. And people say they're energies, but I think they were roads, and here is some proof of the normal ley line. So that ancient highway, it's like a type of super ley line from a super civilization. Here's a normal ley line, and it's actually built on a Roman road. And people ask, why did the Romans bother going all the way up a hill? And the conventional answer for generations has been, well, they wanted to keep the line as straight as possible, so they went over whatever was in the way. But that doesn't make any sense at all, because look, it goes right at the top. So it's following an old road and an old ley line. And they needed to get to the top to see above the trees, which no longer exist. And Alfred Watkins demonstrated this. He said there were excavations done of Roman roads, and they found earlier roads underneath them. So the Romans didn't necessarily build the roads, they paved the roads.
Oh, interesting.
And here's another ley line. This is the Malvern Hills in England, and look, the Roman road. These are Roman bricks, tiles, whatever. They go right up to the top, and the reason for that is, firstly, I suppose that the Roman army wanted to be defended, but it wasn't just armies; it was everyone using these roads. Yeah. Why would you take them up a mountain? It's because the road was already there, and it needed to be. It was a ley line, and this is a ley line stretching across the hills, and then it's going to go off to another hill. The planetary grid system, I'm not sure about this. This was popular in the 70s. This is some kind of energy or geomagnetics. This is the real energy, you see, where the energies of ley lines come into it. I don't know what's causing it. That's a bit bizarre, but I've speculated
we know the Earth is a giant dynamo. We know the Earth is a magnetic dynamo. So there would logically be lines of flux, which we now call ley lines or rose lines.
See where Giza is right there?
Your microphone's quiet, Ian. I can hardly hear you.
Yep,
that shows a big red in Africa, though, like a big central point.
Exactly. There are these central points, and I'm not sure how they came up with this. They could have used ancient sites, but it just shows you there are points. And look, there's one there where they were looking for Atlantis, I suppose. These points are in places, and we don't know what's there today. I think one of them could be near Edinburgh. I don't know.
That one you just pointed at, is that 115 or 118 that you just pointed at? Yeah, that's where Lee Scalman built Coral Castle.
Well, isn't that interesting? So
yeah, he's right on that ley line. That's what he utilized, that ley line as well.
Right above Miami, so that's right there where he built that castle.
And he moved his castle, right? And he moved it closer to the ley line.
That's interesting. That's an interesting one, yeah. And See, this is the thing. Because I'm sort of saying these are ancient highways, we have to look at what was on these ancient highways and how old these highways were. If they're perfectly straight, stretching across continents, they must have been built by a worldwide super civilization. So we're talking pre-Stonehenge. But Stonehenge, why is there a Stonehenge there on the Lee Line? It's because I think all of these ancient sites are built from recycled materials. They simply found, and this includes Giza, they simply found what was on the site and they reused it. So at Stonehenge, they found a bunch of rocks and they rebuilt it. And they built something in this shape, and there's always been something there, and I talked to you about that earlier. There's always been these totem poles at Stonehenge. It's always been a ceremonial site. They didn't just start using it. It's always been used. So it's a handover from the previous civilization, and they crisscross the earth with these pathways. I want to show you this. You might not be familiar with this. That's a bad picture. I'll make it a bit smaller. This is a Frenchman called Guichard in the 30s. He was a contemporary of Alfred Watkins, and he discovered all these towns called Calais, Versailles. They all radiate from a point called Alais, a city called Alais. So they're all an ancient road system, and every town was called Alais. And what does alley mean in English? It means alleyway. It means road. So we have inherited something of this super civilization. I'm going to get to a better picture in a moment. That's another Lee line.
Channels. Sorry? Relating to channels, like the same thing, right? Like
could have been. Yeah, you're right. It's similar. See, that's what a Lee line isn't. That's the Stone Age amber route, amber in Poland, and it went all around. So a Lee line isn't quite that, but it's similar. They might have traded from hill to hill in Stone Age times. There could be one type of Lee line, but the superhighway, that's me. I'm on this huge highway. It's almost like a highway between two religious centers in the most holy city in Poland. And this is unbelievable because there's actually two religious centers. There's one here. This is Częstochowa, where the famous Black Madonna is kept. And here you have this amazing fort. It's an ancient fortress. And I'll just skip through it. You're walking on this forever. This is called the Alley of the Holy Virgin Mary, the Road of the Holy Virgin Mary. And this is an ancient Lee line in modern times, you see. And it goes between this, which is the holy cathedral, the most holy place in Poland, and another place behind it. This is looking back in the other direction from that holy cathedral. It goes to a church, you see, which must have been built on a much older ancient site. And what the communists actually did, they built this here to distract people's attention from that, to show that what they should be concentrating on, mankind's achievements, you see. So even the communists built their religious temple of sorts on this Lee line. So, and it just follows this pattern through history. So that's an old Lee line that's been paved. And, oh, there we go. Look. Now I'm on top of this fortress, this holy church. That is a memory of an Yggdrasil, a huge holy tree, which would have been here according to Germanic mythology. And as you see, it's just here, just on the ground. Yep, there's a lot of stuff here. I'm going to skip through this. Skip. The Black Madonna. By the way, there's a reason she's black. She was the Earth Mother, so she's made up of earth. Okay. Skip. And we'll get into the good stuff. And okay, this is another Lee line in Poland. You climb this hill and you have an amazing view. This is the Krakus Mound, and it's built in ancient times, just like the Celtic mounds in Ireland. And it's another Lee line. When you're on top, you can see other mounds, and this is how a Lee line works. I'm going to skip through it quickly. And yep, there's ancient walls there. Look, this Lee line goes past this, and then there's a castle there, and it keeps going beyond that. There's more stuff on the horizon. Look, that's another mound in the distance on the horizon. And when I was up here, I saw a total Lee line grid. It was just incredible. That's that Kościuszko mound I showed you earlier, and it's one mound looks at another, and these are actually ancient mounds because on the equinoxes and all this, you see sun rising above different mounds corresponding to astronomical dates. But what I really want to talk to you about is this sort of stuff, and not this particular line, but something like this. Look at this. This is the line of St. Michael's I talked to you about. And it goes there. It would have kept going in ancient times, and it would have kept going in that direction into Doggerland. That's where the Dogger Bank is, right there in ancient times. And it totally bisects the land as evenly as possible. This was built by people who were interested in having a strong economy. They wanted to exploit Britain as much as possible. They built a road right across it. And the reason this is called the St. Michael's line is there are lots of St. Michael's churches and St. Michael's sites along the line. So this would have been the Michael Road or something like that in deeply ancient times. And here's what I want to show you. This is the proof. This is the golden proof. The ice ages, the ice caps went up to about here. Okay. This road here might have been pre-Ice Age. This might have been built in the previous version of our current warm period of the Holocene. It also absolutely bisects England very well. So it's very efficient for traffic wanting to get onto this major road, then keep going, possibly to Denmark, Helsinki. And I think this was done during the Ice Age because this one here is underneath, it's further south than the ice caps reached, so it would have been perfect for exploiting southern England. And this one was done in a far more ancient time. And all these cities here that you see, the reason these were chosen as cities is because there was a lot of rubble there to work with, and because they were in an ideal location, chosen for the same time as other more ancient cities, for the same reason as other more ancient builders chose those locations as cities. People saw the ancient ruins and they said, what a beautiful location. And there's even ruins here. Let's put them together, build houses, build cities. And I think these are from tens of thousands of years ago. And this is the proof positive of an ancient super civilization. And now we get to the one in France. And this is a much better picture. So there's this guy in the 1930s in a small pamphlet which he distributed. He distributed this discovery, and he said it all radiates from this town of Alais. So whatever is in Alais, you can draw a grid of lines: Olizy, Oinzy, Oinzykot, Calais, Kalisz in Poland. That, by the way, that is the oldest city in Poland. That's on one of Ptolemy's maps. He called it Kalicia in the 2nd century AD. It's on the Amber Route. Alisio, Kalis. It goes on and on. These are only a few of them. These are only a few of them. There must have been something that was being exploited at Alais. I haven't yet looked at any overhead maps to see what was there, but there must have been something incredible there and some reason why they put it there, unless they were bisecting Europe itself. So they could have been cutting Spain in half, cutting France partly in half, Germany. They wanted the most efficient road possible through Europe. So this is some super highway. So these were built by people who didn't even live on this land. They sort of imposed their roads, imposed their will upon this land. And here's some of the proof of what I was saying. That's St. Michael's line. It's underneath the ice cap. So this may have been built during the Ice Age. And this is a further grid. And by the way, it goes through Versailles as well. That's another type of Alais, Versailles. Near Paris. It cuts right through Versailles. And so I'm wondering, is there some ancient structure? And look, it goes near Stonehenge as well. That's another interesting thing. Was there some ancient structure at Versailles and the king said, oh, let's turn that into my palace? Does the Versailles palace have some foundation stones from a 100,000-year-old structure? I wonder if this goes through Giza. I'm not quite sure. And I think all these ancient monuments were along these ancient roads, and they were all rebuilt by Stone Age people. Because look, if you're a Stone Age person, you want to build something like the pyramids or Stonehenge, isn't it enough work simply getting the stones? On top of that, you have to come up with a brilliant structure to build. So I'm thinking, why not take a shortcut? Why not recycle what's already there? Isn't it more likely they simply used what was already on site?
Well, we know that's the case on many, many locations. Baalbek was built on top of an older structure. The temple, Solomon's temple, was built on an older structure. So
certainly.
So there's no doubt. I think you're spot on.
Certainly, and that's right. And so all of these, they're called alley or alley, and the reason is that means that's where the road was. That's where the alley was. You see, and we've retained that in our English language, which shows that we ourselves are descended from the civilization that built all these ancient roadways. And these are perfectly straight roadways. This was a super civilization. This was all the world speaking one language.
Expand that out a second. Go back to that. Just expand it out a little.
This one?
No, the one we were watching. Yeah.
Oh,
can you expand it out to Africa? That one there. See, where does it go through the top of Africa right there? Is that through Giza? Number 2, perhaps, or 1?
No, the Giza one would go.
Oh no, that'd be way over. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it would be somewhere. It would be really interesting to see, and you know what? I bet you it does. I bet you it does.
Yeah.
By the way, there's a lot of Gizas around as well. There is Gozo, one of the islands of Malta. There is Gaza of Palestine. These are ancient names which were everywhere, and they refer to a word which we cannot today really interpret or understand or fathom. And yeah, as I said, the Lee line nicks Versailles, and they did a lot of building work there. So did they reuse ancient monuments? And of course, Paris was a Roman Celtic city. It isn't quite on the line. But and look, there's so many of these similar sounding names. This guy was a genius. He came up with just hundreds of them. And that's the same thing, you see. It's Onzi, all these different names. It's unbelievable. So this is an ancient network. I'm not sure what that is, so I'll skip it. And yeah, lots of them cross through Glastonbury. Glastonbury is unbelievable. We're talking geoengineering, landscape engineering on a huge scale. I don't have a picture, but they actually physically may have built huge mounds there. Those are the mounds we see, and they built them in patterns of parallelograms and other mathematical shapes. It's unbelievable. Something happened at Glastonbury, which is similar to what happened at Giza. Now, this is another axis which is slightly famous. Do you see where it crosses? It crosses all these areas which would have been above sea level during the Ice Age, which lasted from about 110,000 years ago till 10,000 years ago, except for down here, which would have been Mediterranean. The rest of it would have been following land, and it may have been coastal land, you see. So this may have been the entrance to the Adriatic here, and this may have been the coast. And certainly all of this, a lot of this was all land. So we have just a huge highway.
Yeah.
And you look where, yep.
Yeah, before the end of the Ice Age, very likely all the spaces of what would be water on that line would have been land.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's why people are finding these, and people think this must refer to some kind of energy. And in a way, they're right. But I think it's ancient energy coming through somehow. And look where it goes. It goes to Armageddon, this particular one. So the world ends at Armageddon. The road ends at Armageddon. Another thing, It goes through Delphi. Delphi, there's a fortress. This is what people don't know. The fortress, Delphi is an old fortress which has been converted into a religious site. It looks a lot like the stuff you get at like Sacsayhuaman, the Machu Picchu sort of hillside. It's a hillside fortification, yes.
And isn't that funny? Philadelphia is where that Grand Lodge is I was talking about earlier.
Well, that's interesting. There's definitely the synchronicities which pop up are so amazing, and you have to wonder why you know, it's just incredible. And all these cities, they mean, some of them are famous, but lots of them, they mean little to us, but they could be ancient capital cities, you see, in deeply ancient times. And again, that's the St. Michael's line, and that's why it's called the St. Michael's line. It's full of St. Michael's. Even Avebury. So Avebury could be, and a friend of mine said, you know those Avebury stones? They look a lot like the stones of Sacsayhuaman. But they're not together anymore because they've got all these funny angles, and they're absolutely enormous. They look like they were part of a huge ancient wall. So, yeah, I find that amazing. And there were 3 totem poles or something. There was 3 of something buried at Stonehenge in 8000 BC in post holes. The legend of Lyonesse, it's similar to the legend of the Salt Pillar. Someone tried to rescue, I think, a princess from here, and he was swamped, and someone else who didn't got away. or something like that. And this is at Land's End, at the end of England, and this is more proof that this road actually extended. This is the ancient highway, I guess, and there would have been more stuff here. And for generations, time immemorial afterwards, people said, if you look into the water, you can see where the old churches were, where the old cities were. And this was swamped perhaps around between 8,000 and 5,000 BC. So the legend really does continue a long way. That's another interesting line I saw. I'm not sure how this is measured, if it's accurate, but have a look at that. Baalbek, Troy, Stonehenge, New York,
Teotihuacan.
and Teotihuacan.
Wow.
Teotihuacan. Yep. So are these all sites which they decided to put cities there because they found building materials there? Because there were always cities there. And also this straight line, I'm not sure how accurate this representation is. I guess it would be a curve of sorts, but you mentioned earlier a different type of equator. I'm wondering if there was a type of equator here. That would explain why Russia was tropical. If it would be all the way down, it would be, anyway. But you see what I'm saying? Baalbek, huge stones that the Romans certainly couldn't carve and move around. Look, maybe they did, but the fact is they didn't anywhere else. They only did at Baalbek. Troy.
No, it's just called Baalbek.
Baalbek, yeah. And exactly. And Troy, the legend was this is an impenetrable fortified city. And that's why the Trojan War was so famous. That's why the deeds of Achilles were so famous, because they couldn't get in there because the building materials were so good. Stonehenge also, there's a few building materials lying around.
See, Aaron,
I'm not sure.
That line there is the same one I was talking about that goes through the
Teotihuacan.
The serpent, temple of the fallen serpent or whatever.
Feathered serpent,
sorry. And it goes right through where Sandy Hook is. It's the same line.
Oh.
That's interesting.
Oh,
that's that same line that I was talking about.
Oh,
wow.
And when you look at the temple of the feathered serpent, when you look at the Sandy Hook school from above, they looked almost identical.
Wow.
Yeah, there's something to chew on.
There's things going on that are just hard to work out.
We don't understand. We don't.
Yeah,
the hidden mysteries have been kept from us, and they still have them. They keep them in their lodges, and they don't tell anyone. And
I just wanted to say that you mentioned that there's always been cities in these locations.
I think so.
And I just wanted to say that, look, I'm not one of those people who claims to be sensitive to stand inside of a crop circle and they can feel whatever energies and stuff. I'm not one of those people. However, I have traveled to Florida and all around Florida extensively through my work. And I will say this, and I've traveled up and down the East Coast. I've traveled all across this country. I've been to Rome. I've been around the world. There are places that I have traveled to that, without a doubt, and I'm not exaggerating a little bit, even a little, without a doubt, that there is some energy just in that area. When I travel to Florida, there is an energy. It's almost like as soon as you cross the damn border, it's like, wow, it just feels different. Something feels different.
Maybe that's why they put the border there. That's I totally agree. There's some such weird energies that you get, and every ancient site has a different energy. It's just it's amazing to experience some of them. Some of them are warm, nurturing. Some of them, like Stonehenge, I don't know if you guys have been to Stonehenge. People say Stonehenge is ominous, and it actually has a brooding sort of malevolence to it. It feels like there's a jack-in-the-box about to spring. Something's about to surprise you, but it's just so patient that it's not going to, it's not going to happen, but it just feels like something's going to scare you. Something's going to pop up. It's hiding something. And that's I suppose how my subconscious interpreted the energy. And yeah, every site has a different energy. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Now, two things I want to point out with this particular image. We had talked about the knobs that potentially could be markers with their shadows on certain days. And then, you know, for a long time, it was thought that the knobs were used to literally lift the stones and put them in place. And logically, from a construction standpoint, that makes a lot of sense. However, with these particular stones, and forgive me, is this Sacsayhuaman? I sometimes get the
Yes, I think this is I think it's called the Sun Temple, and it's
okay, but this is Sacsayhuaman. Sometimes I get them mixed up.
I think so. Yes, it is.
Okay,
yes.
but the point I want to make here was, one is that if you look at the stone, I'm looking at the stone in particular to the right of your cursor, which has 3 very large knobs on it. And obviously they're eroded and probably cracked and broken, but those are too big to be used as lifting devices. Do you know what I mean? So at the very least, those particular knobs, which are very large, would not possibly be used for lifting. And I would also point out that on the other stone, if you move to the left, second from the far right, it looks like it also had 3 knobs. It looks like 2 knobs on the upper portions are missing.
Yes, it also appears the knobs were actually really not knobs originally, but a huge piece of something jutting out. And these ones in particular were converted into knobs or something, or sheared off, scraped off. But you're right, they don't look like they're for lifting at all.
The other thing I would want to point out is the center stone has these, just one to the right. It has these step-styled carving, which is very reminiscent of Native American artwork, and also Peruvian stone carvings has that same style.
Exactly. It's very interesting. Many of those American tribes, I think even the Hopi, they say that, I think some people say they are the Mayas. They are the Mayans, and they fled north, and other people fled in different directions from a series of catastrophes. Certainly, it's very much like you find later on. But it's also a type of style which you find around the world. It's a type of chevron. I wish we could see what the rest of it, whether it was cruciform in appearance or not, but it's not much survives. Someone deliberately defaced these. There was some kind of iconoclasm, and yeah, something happened. By the way, these things here, do you guys have any clue on these sort of Aaron, as a construction person, what do you think of these interstitial sort of structures?
I understand those to be slip joints.
Yeah. So therefore earthquakes or something like that.
That's the story, and that's what I hear. However, the one that's all the way to the left, that doesn't make any sense in terms of being a slip joint, because it has a hook at the top and it's wide at the bottom. So that is not the kind of joint that would allow stones to move up and down. A slip joint would have to be straight and parallel in order to work as a slip joint.
If this is not a slip joint, then maybe none of these are slip joints, and it must be something else. To me, see, the interesting thing is these almost look like bolts or something, and it's been fossilized over. Something's been poured over the top. It's bizarre. So these things are just so hard to understand and interpret because we just don't have I think we're not advanced enough in many ways.
It just looks like there was something more there before, and it's been removed.
Yeah, there's
like more to the structure, it seems, and it's been removed, and we're seeing behind of what was there originally. This is what was behind it.
Yes.
I'm also astounded at the base of the 2 stones on the left. You can see the smaller stones that they're sitting on. And from a construction standpoint, you have something very, very large, very, very heavy, resting on something that is small, irregular, and doesn't look very stable, but apparently they haven't moved. So obviously it is stable, but it's just not the kind of thing that you would normally build something large and heavy on. You usually put small things on top of big things, not the other way around.
Yeah, I'm
That to me is
wondering.
that's a really curious base for something so large and massive as those stones.
I'm wondering if they dug underneath and then filled up the hole with these stones, because you're right. Someone who built this wouldn't use this as a foundation, would
Right.
they?
That doesn't make any.
Looks like it's been repaired or something. Yeah.
It's been
Reinforced.
repaired.
You're right. Maybe they were backfilled. Maybe somebody did do some, a little bit of excavating to see if they could find the bottom, and then they filled them in. I don't know.
Bit of
I don't
treasure
know.
hunting, perhaps. Yeah, but this is the thing. There would have been elaborate designs here. Look at this. Do you see this here? This is almost like a reinforcing sort of joint that you find at Pumapunku. And here you have similar sort of things as well. I'm not sure what to make of something like that. This is, but these are they also on their walls they carved snakes, they carved other sorts of reliefs, but some of these look technological to me rather than artistic. What do you guys think?
I don't know. It's hard to tell.
Well, there's really not a whole lot there to make much of a judgment on.
Yeah.
I do agree. I do agree. They're probably more technological than artistic.
Yeah. Anyway, I'll go to the next slide.
Yeah, please continue.
So the reason I brought this slide up is to show that what if all this is recycled from a previous civilization, but in particular this wall could actually be the previous super civilization, and everything else is what's been quarried from this. So all the Inca stuff that they say comes on top. All these blocks here. Look, they've all been quarried from larger blocks like this, and perhaps this is all that's left. And yes, I think this is poured in some way. It's been made soft. That's obvious, and it's been smoothed out. It's just bizarre. But I think this, if there is anything from the previous super civilization, it'll be inside the Great Pyramid, or it will be these stones here, which we cannot explain. And the fact we cannot explain how they were built proves they were made by people smarter than us. So it must have been a very long time ago, because our history doesn't go back far enough to a society quite like ours, does it?
No.
I am wondering if this must be along a type of American ley line, but I haven't really seen any South American ley line pictures. But I'm guessing certainly they were along a ley line. This is real concrete, and real concrete rots. And so whatever concrete those were built out of, it's something amazing, something that the Egyptians had as well, because you mentioned that red granite in Egypt that just fragments like granite shouldn't do. So it's something employing, and obviously again this is 20th century concrete, and it doesn't last long at all. It's almost like it's not much more than plaster. It just breaks.
Right.
It's so weak. Concrete really is weak. Just to inject a bit of time, and that's Patala Palace in Tibet. I think what you had at Sacsayhuaman, you also had here, and there must have been building materials. This was a type of fortress. If this was redesigned by the Incas, this here would be a terraced sort of farm in the middle. In fact, there's a garden there. So this is very much like the Inca gardens of a sort of farm, or a sort of terraced farming system, which you have right here. I think this is a similar culture, but again, in deeply ancient times, like longer than we know. Well, guys, what did you think of that?
Brilliant.
Awesome.
Absolutely brilliant. I just love the way you approach these things, and I'm thrilled to have you on with us, and thank you for your time. You're an amazing guy. You're a really interesting character. I just love your channel. I would encourage everybody to visit Charles Kos on YouTube. You'll be astounded at some of the discoveries and some.
Well, thanks so much, Aaron. That's amazing.
I really, really particularly like the Yonaguni theory that you have. I'm really on board with that. I don't know what else to say, but remind us where people can find your book.
The book is on Amazon. It's called In Search of the Origin of Pyramids and the Lost Gods of Giza, and it's talking about worldwide pyramids, and it's on Amazon. And Aaron, thanks for your kind words. That's amazing. I think you're amazing too, and so are you, Ian. And this was an
Thank you.
amazing experience. I loved it.
Thanks for being here, Charles. You guys can visit him on YouTube. Just type in Charles. It's Kos, right? That's how you pronounce
That's
it.
right. That's right.
KOS.
That's correct.
Yeah. So yeah,
That's correct.
you can see him on YouTube. He's got some great
Charles?
videos.
Feel free to mirror the video tomorrow once the upload is
Oh, yes,
finished.
please. Yep, that would be awesome.
In the broadcast, feel free to mirror the video on your channel. I can't wait. I would love to have you back because this is a big, we could just go on and on and on. There's so many things we didn't even cover. And I would love to have you back, and let's do this again sometime soon.
Let's do it. It's a date. I'd love to come back. That would be awesome.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you again.
Okay.
And I normally spend a few minutes thanking everybody. I apologize to the people viewing. I really have not paid hardly any attention to the chat. We've been screen sharing, and I'm just enthralled by what we've been talking about. So, Greatest Potential and Allison Twist, Young Guts was here. What did you say there? Voice reminds me so much of Johnny Supertramp. Johnny's, are they related? Huh. I don't know. Big P99 was here. F Your G was here. Just want to thank everybody. Illusion Shattered. Dominic, the conscientious objector, was here earlier. I want to thank you guys for tuning in. Juxtapose, here's my buddy up in Pennsylvania. So R&R, Rebel Rhymes was here. Thanks, you guys. Thanks for tuning in. We love you all. Charles, you're an amazing person. I'd love to have you back real soon. And I'm enthralled, man. I really am. I could spend weeks on your channel.
Awesome. Thanks, Aaron.
And
Okay.
before you forget, Aaron,
Yeah.
what was in the box? What was in the bag?
Oh, yeah. You know what? Nobody's even bothered to guess what it was. I'll tell you what it was. I don't know where it is. Nancy moved it. She didn't know what I was using it for. It was just a blue envelope is really all it was. Charles, what you don't know is I've been trying to do this remote viewing sort of experiment with the viewers. And at least for the last 3 weeks, I put an object in a little knapsack, and I give people the opportunity to try to have their own remote viewing session to see if they can figure out what's in there. It's just for fun. So just to let you know, Ian, it was just a blue envelope. And I've not gotten anybody who's even tried to guess. Nobody's leaving me comments. Nobody's interested. So I'll try it again next week. And if I don't get any more interest, I'm just going to, shut that down because nobody seems to give a shit.
No remote viewers out there anywhere.
Remote viewing is hard, or at least people think it's hard.
Well, I believe in remote viewing. I believe it's possible. I do believe it's possible. And I even went to Florida and I attended a seminar, and I got to meet the world famous remote viewer by the name of Ed Dames. And they made a movie about this guy. He was played by Kevin Spacey in the movie called The Men Who Stare at Goats. And so I got to meet the guy and listen to his seminar, and turns out he's a big freaking shyster. But I still believe in the validity of remote viewing. But nevertheless, we were just playing around with a little experiment, and I haven't gotten any interest, and so probably won't be continuing that. So just to let you know, it was a blue envelope, and there it is. So there's that. Ian, if you're ready to take us out. Charles, it's brilliant. I mean, I can't say enough, man. I really love your channel. I love your approach, and I'm dying to just keep going with this. We could go on and on. So let's have you back sometime soon.
Let's do it. That'll be awesome.
Yeah, thanks again, Charles, for coming.
Thanks very much.
Very
Okay, cheers, guys.
informative.
See ya.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thanks. Have a good night.
You too. Bye-bye.